Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, from wherever you are joining us from, and welcome to the Fit the Future Innovation Lab for Legume Systems Research, Eastern Africa, and the Great Lakes Regional Stakeholder Convening. My name is Simon Gicheha, and I'm coordinating the Legume Lab activities in East and Southern Africa, and I will be facilitating our event today. I'm glad that you could find time to join us, and we are looking forward to your input and contributions on the gaps in the legume value chain in the region and the mechanisms to address those gaps. So this meeting is being recorded, and the program for the day is available in the chat and includes the agenda and the bios of the speakers we are going to have today. We can also introduce ourselves in the chat and possibly further share with us your area of engagement within the legume value chain in the region. And you can as well post any questions you may have and reflections on the discussions and the presentations during the sessions at any point in time, and they will be responded to in real time. We can remember to keep our microphones muted so that we can collectively control background distractions during the sessions. At this time, as we also continue to wait out for others to join, it's with great pleasure now that I introduce Dr. Barry Petendry to give the opening remarks for our convening today. Barry is the director of the Feed the Future Innovation Lab for Legume Systems Research, and he's also an adjunct professor at MSU with over 20 years of experience in international development, ranging from integrated pest management to scaling strategies for educational interventions at the last mile. Welcome, Barry.
Hello, my name is Barry Petendry. I'm the director for the Legume Systems Research Innovation Lab, as well as being an endowed chair professor at Purdue University and an adjunct professor at Michigan State University. I'm very pleased to welcome you today to this essentially nearly day-long listening session. We're here to engage you around the next stage of the Legume Systems Research Innovation Lab. As you're probably well aware, we've completed our first successful 5 years, and we're now in our second phase of this program. And one of the fundamental things about what we're approaching this particular program from the perspective is look at legumes as a system, from a systems perspective. That is to first identify the challenges and gaps in the system, and then based on an understanding of those challenges and the gaps in that system or systems, in turn, we will look towards making investments in research for development innovations that help fill those gaps within the context of those particular systems. With a look towards where those research development innovations sit in a product life cycle. So how far along are they? What is the potential towards scale near the end of this program, or at least garnering the necessary evidence to pass off to scaling partners who can take it to the next step? So as we engage with each other today, we're looking for a better understanding of the system that you work in, legume systems that you're working in. What are those gaps in the system? What are those opportunities for potential investments? And an eye towards what might be research for development innovations that might help fill those gaps. So again, this is a journey that we'll be going on today together in order to better understand the system from multiple perspectives. You'll learn more about our team's approach to this and hear from many of our team members today. And we'll move towards breakout sessions and discussions and moving forward to engage with each other as how we can move forward in this next phase of the program so we can develop strategies that will be most successful in legume cropping systems in your region of the world. So again, thank you for the time today to interact with us. I'd like to thank USAID Washington, especially our AOR, Daniel Bailey. I'd like to thank the USAID missions who played an active role in this. And as we move forward today, I'd like to thank both the speakers and the audience, the speakers and those other participants that are engaging today, as well as the translators and other individuals who played a very active role in making sure today's event is happening. So again, thank you, USAID, for your ongoing support and your support for this program and engagement in these efforts to improve on legume cropping systems globally. Thank you very much, and we look forward to engaging you today.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter Dree, for those enlightening opening remarks. Your insights are invaluable and set the perfect tone for our convening today. At this point, it is my distinct pleasure to introduce Dr. David Ameo to share his opening remarks for our conference today. David is the team leader and president of the International Center for Evaluation and Development based in Nairobi. He has over 25 years of experience in leadership and practical experience in M&E research and learning. And he has also served as the head of strategy, monitoring, and evaluation at Alliance for Green Revolution in Africa, and also as a senior director for M&E at the Millennium Challenge Corporation in Washington, D.C. Welcome, David, and share your opening remarks.
Good morning to you all. Good morning, Simon and Barry. Good morning. I'm so happy to hear Barry talking about the systems. As someone said, my experience in Agra over the years was one of the opportunities to be able to fill the seed systems in Africa, and especially to catalyze a green revolution. And that quest have taken us to ICE, and we are so happy to be part of this Legume Systems Innovation Lab. We thank USAID, as Barry have said, and also Michigan State University and Purdue for giving us an opportunity to host this lab in East Africa. To work on a gap in a crop value system is something that is very unique and also very important. And the happiness about what we are doing is to have people who live in East Africa and Central Africa, who interact with the locals, who interact with the regions, and who interact with the policymakers and development practitioners in this region. And to be able to be part of assessing the gap in the systems. These are gaps that we face every day and we encounter every day in our interaction with low-income consumers and seed producers in the region. The good thing about the Innovation Lab and the direction it's taking is bringing people who are always involved in the locality, in the region, and in the districts to assessing the gap. This gap assessment is not being done somewhere and research being done somewhere. We have invited you, and we are happy to have almost over 30 participants here. This is an opportunity to be at the table. They said, if you are not on the table, you are on the menu. Now, the people, researchers, and experienced people in East Africa are not going to be on the menu, but rather we are going to be on the table. So we welcome you to join us to participate in the breakout session, to contribute, so that the gaps that we will be able to identify and we will be able to target the research funding will be gaps that will be filled to solve the situation within the legume systems in East and Southern Africa. We are so happy to have you, and we are at ICE are happy to team up with the Innovation Lab to work with you, to collaborate with you, and to walk the journey with you as we work to fill the gaps in the legume system in Central and East Africa. Thank you very much, and we really look forward to interacting and participating throughout the session with you all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, David, for those inspiring opening remarks that undoubtedly resonate with the purpose of our convening today. And now to set the stage For our convening, I will invite John Middendorp, the Deputy Director for the Legume Systems Innovation Lab at Michigan State University. John has worked in international development for over 40 years.
The Innovation Lab for Legume Systems Research region.
Maybe before John comes, he has worked in international development for over 40 years in a variety of leadership roles in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. He has managed and or led 10 USAID projects in over 25 countries, including all the Feed the Future target countries, focusing on capacity development. Welcome, John, and share the objectives of today's convening.
Regional Stakeholder Conference for the East Africa Great Lakes region. We're glad to have you with us today. My name is John William Middendorp. I am the Deputy Director of the lab. And in these few minutes, I want to give you just a brief introduction to the program for today. We're going to do two things today. First, we will look back at where we came from and how we got to this point. And then we will look forward at what we are hoping to accomplish in the second phase of the lab. First of all, then, how did we get to this point? For those of you who accompanied us through the first phase of the lab, you know that the lab has sponsored many singular accomplishments, including technologies, publications, degree training, short-term trainees. Also, we've worked with many countries and other projects, as well as many partners in order to implement the accomplishments of the first phase. We felt, however, that something was lacking in spite of all of these very significant contributions to Legume Systems accomplished during the first phase. We felt that it lacked adhesiveness and coherence, and although each of these accomplishments in and of themselves were very important, we felt that we could have done more to coordinate these efforts in order to achieve greater system impacts. As many of you know, during the first phase of the lab, we developed in the second year at the Global Convening in Saly, Senegal, the beginnings of a strategy white paper through a participatory exercise that included our researchers and partners in order to identify the highest priorities for the legume systems where we were working at the time, which were the regions of West Africa and Southern Africa. We revisited this strategy white paper every year, all the way through the fifth year of the lab, where we put together recommendations for a second phase. You can find the strategy white paper at the QR code shown on this slide. And also, if you don't have QR code capture on your phone, you can follow the website link that is listed on the left-hand side of this page. During the fifth year of phase one, when we gathered for our global convening in Victoria Falls, Zambia, we came back to the strategy white paper once again and asked the groups to divide into three areas, one focusing on pre-production, the second one focusing on production, and then the third one focusing on post-production. We asked the groups to identify the highest priorities in each one of these areas that could be used as recommendations for the second phase of the lab. At the time, we did not know who would be carrying the lab forward. We knew that we may be invited to submit a proposal for a second phase, which finally we were. However, at this time, we were simply preparing recommendations for whoever was going to carry the lab forward for the next 5 years. Under pre-production, you can see here that the recommendations were that cropping systems had to be demand-driven. They had to use the product life cycle, that would be an important factor in understanding how we could support legume systems. Secondly, it recommended that national breeding programs be strengthened through infrastructure and capacity development. Thirdly, that seed production systems be made profitable and resilient, and also once again linked to demand. And then finally, that there be a genotyping of all the cultivars of the legume systems to serve as a database for variety selection and trait selection in order to respond especially to climate change. For the area of production, the recommendations were that there be a focus on soil health, especially soil biota, fertility, and water availability for rapid response to climate change, that there be a greater examination of intercropping with crops or shrubs, crop residue management, integration of biofertilizers in mycorrhiza. Also that there be a focus on IPM, expanding into the areas of bio-based solutions such as biopesticides and biocontrol agents, and then a focus on the scaling of the crops and systems that we were supporting through the lab. And finally, for the post-production area, there was a recommendation to get a better understanding of urban nutritional needs, especially with the trends of urbanization toward urban areas, that we needed better market intelligence, and that must be made available to value chain actors, that we should connect providers with buyers as the core issue for value chains, and then finally that integration into regional markets was very important for legume systems. When developing our proposal for the second phase of the lab, we took these recommendations very seriously, and as a result, we came up with what might be called a framework for the second phase proposal. We identified 3 core values that we wanted to make central to the structure of the second phase of the lab. First of all, we wanted to make sure that our decision-making was decentralized. That's the reason behind, for example, this regional stakeholder meeting. We felt it was no longer possible for us to make decisions from a central location, but rather that these decisions needed to be participatory and should include the actors in the regions where we anticipated working. And so these regional stakeholder conferences were put together so that you, as actors in the value chain, the legume value chains, would have opportunity to express to us what you think are the highest priorities for research in your region and in your legume value chains. A second core value for the second phase is that all of our cropping systems should be demand-driven. We know that it does little good to increase production in cropping systems if there are no off-takers for that crop. And so we want to align the interests of the value chain in such a way that everything all the way from research to post-production, that all of these activities are responding to some form of market demand. Our third core value, and one that responds to our name is Legume Systems Research Innovation Lab, is that all of our projects be system linked. We have to approach this from a systems perspective because it does little good to resolve an issue in one part of the value chain if it does not benefit the entire value chain. And so when we select projects, we will be doing so from a systems perspective. And of course, we want to encourage all of our applicants to exercise systems thinking in putting together their proposals so that they can demonstrate how their particular project will influence the system as a whole. In order to accommodate these core values into the structure of the lab, we took on a new design and a new approach in order to ensure that these values are carried out not only in the way that we are structured, but also in the activities that we sponsor and implement. And so it begins with the management entity, with which you're all already familiar. The management entity will continue in its leadership role. However, to the management entity, we have added what we are calling the technical leadership team. The technical leadership team consists of 4 area experts in the 4 areas that USAID asked us to address in the second phase of the lab. And those 4 areas are gender equity and social inclusion, they are seed systems and varietal development, they are resilience and climate change, and also value chains and market integration. So we have named 4 experts in these 4 areas to assist us as a management entity in thinking through the way that we address these issues in each one of the regions where we are working, including in the Great Lakes and East African region. They will be assisting us not only today in orienting us to the system issues that we need to address as researchers, but also will be assisting us over the life of the lab in defining the key research areas and interpreting those research results in such a way that we are able to identify the system impact that we are having as a lab, not only in our management entity, but also through the various activities that we sponsor. To the technical leadership team, we have added a multi-stakeholder platform coordination team. This is Siad Pabra, with whom we have worked in the past. We did research on multi-stakeholder platforms in the first phase of the lab, and the results were so convincing to us that we decided that this needed to be incorporated into the life of each one of the projects that we sponsor. So Siad Pabra will be assisting us in identifying not only existing multi-stakeholder platforms with which our projects can engage, but also in those areas where there possibly may not be a multi-stakeholder platform in place. They will be advising as to how to create one and how to develop the membership of those multi-stakeholder platforms so that each one of our projects has some kind of value chain integration as part of their mandate. In order to honor the value of decentralization, we are hosting what you are attending today, a regional stakeholder conference. This is a way in which we can move the energy of the lab and also the decision-making of the lab down to the regional levels. And we expect your participation today in helping us identify not only the research priorities, but also system indicators that we can begin to measure to determine whether or not we have effectively addressed those issues in the system. Once those are identified, then RFPs will be issued, and from those RFPs will come funded projects. We don't know whether there will be 1, 2, or 3 for the East Africa Great Lakes region. However, the RFPs will go out, we will evaluate those RFPs, and we will respond to them. We will be hosting a subsequent meeting at a later date after the RFPs have been released in order to go through the actual request for proposals and also answer any questions that you might have. In the meantime, however, as you think about putting together your proposals, there are a few things that you should keep in mind. First of all, the research areas that have been assigned to the lab by USAID are best agronomic practices and services, inclusive inputs and market systems, varietal development and scaling, and climate change adaptation. In addition, our key crops are cowpea and bean. That does not mean that we cannot consider other legume systems. Feel free to make proposals in that regard, but it would be good if you do that to make the value proposition evident for that particular legume system. Our geographic focus for this region is East Africa and the Great Lakes. This is a new region for us, so we don't have target countries yet, but that will come out of the proposals that you submit. Also keep in mind that there are other regions. There's Southern African region, there's the West African region, and also Central America and the Caribbean. And although we don't expect you to submit proposals for those regions, if your project would have implications for those regions, it would be good to highlight that as well, because that would, of course, increase the value of your proposal. So our tasks for today are to identify the gaps that cause inefficiencies, ineffectiveness, loss, or waste in the legume value chains, to identify research priorities that would provide solutions for those gaps, and then finally to identify key system indicators that we can measure. And just to give you a sense of the timeline here, we are hosting the regional stakeholder conferences in March and April. We will send out a request for concept notes in May. We will move to full proposals in June, and then finally awards will be made in July. So thank you for your attention, and we look forward to great discussions today.
So thank you very much, John, for setting the stage for us. Your thoughtful introduction surely provides us with a clear roadmap for our discussions today. Unfortunately, we do not have time for questions to John, but we encourage you to post your questions on the Q&A for John to provide written responses. As he has mentioned, there are 4 technical leadership teams, or the TLT members, that will make presentations today, in addition to presentations on multi-stakeholder platforms and the product lifecycle. But before I welcome the first TLT member to present, please, I remind you that the main objective of this convening is to hear from you. Please use the chat to provide your input into the current gaps in the legume value chain in Eastern African region and the research priorities that could address those gaps. You could also briefly share with us your point of engagement with the legume value chain and your experiences on the chat. So the Q&A section can be used to ask any clarification questions to the speakers on their presentations. But because of time, only a few of those that are posted will be addressed after the presentations, and the presenters can provide other written responses to the rest of the questions on the chat. So at this time, I would like to introduce Camille Renou and Stephen Okeo of Seed2B. Camille is the technical lead, Seed Systems at the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, Seed2B. He develops and oversees the seed strategy for Sub-Saharan Africa and coordinates the implementation of Pan-African seed projects that aim to improve farmers' availability and accessibility to performing varieties. Stephen works in M&E at the Syngenta Foundation. In his current role, he is tasked with developing and overseeing effective data collection methods and also analyzing project data that supports M&E research and learning components for Syngenta Foundation project activities in participating countries. So the Seed2B serves as the seed systems and varietal development lead for the Legume Systems Innovation Lab. Welcome, Camille and Steve, and share with us on seed systems and varietal development.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the East Africa Regional Stakeholder Convening meeting with our presentation on seed system and varietal development for East Africa region. So today we will give an introduction of who we are, and we will give you the study methodology that we employed to gather insights on seed development and varietal, on seed systems and varietal development, and share with you the key findings that we were able to obtain on breeding systems and pipeline of varieties, seed variety adoption, seed production, and regulatory environment. And these insights will lead us to provide an overview of the conclusions and recommendations for the seed systems in this particular region. So So who are we? So Seeds to Be Africa is a Kenya-based social enterprise and an affiliate to the Syngenta Foundation for Sustainable Agriculture, whose main objective is to help or support smallholder farmers in Africa access quality seeds of improved varieties for the crops that they need. So we facilitate the introduction of quality seeds through a systematic varietal commercialization approach that includes market assessment of varieties, technology scouting, variety screening, adaptation, registration, and conducting of marketing trials. We also perform and support varietal licensing agreements and private sector engagements and capacity building. We do policy advocacy and support farmer aggregation and market linkages. We believe in a more choice and better access in order to increase the varietal turnover and smallholder farmer resilience and subsequently improve their income and livelihoods. Our approach is based on a product life cycle of variety and demand-led principles, which guides the marketing and management decisions through development, introduction, growth, maturity, and decline of varieties. Today, our objective to provide these insights will be to enable us understand the current status in the country's legume seed systems for beans. We will identify gaps in the legume seed systems for these countries. And through this, we'll make recommendations where investment can be strengthened through research and policy. This will also enable us advise the Legume System Innovation Lab and its partners on seed systems development approaches and the key system indicators to be measured for impact and change. Our findings today will apply to East Africa countries of DR Congo, Rwanda, Burundi, and Tanzania. Our study methodology approach combined a desk research and an online survey to enable us examine the breeding systems and pipeline of varieties, seed regulatory environment, seed production, and seed variety adoption insights. We were privileged to speak to 10 key stakeholders that are responsible for the bean value chains in these particular countries. Our study also triangulates the insights from the survey with secondary sources of reports, journals, and case studies. The insights that we found were analyzed through a literature synthesis of quantitative and qualitative assessment of surveys, combined also with the findings we obtained through interviews from the stakeholders. So today our presentation is going to be a high level of the overall regional findings, but a report with specific country details will be released in the coming months. So what are the key findings that we found today? On the first topic of breeding systems and pipeline of varieties, we highlight the status and gaps in the breeding systems of beans. And while doing the study, we found out that the value chain actors that engage in bean value chain for these particular countries are aware and are knowledgeable about the existing pipeline of varieties of beans in their countries. It's interesting for us to mention that we found out that there is a high interest from private sector players to be involved in breeding participation through varietal selection, registration, and commercialization process. Regarding the breeding capacity for the institutions that support in breeding, we found out that there's a limited capacity in terms of funds and infrastructure by the national public institutions, And we only obtained an average of 3 breeders in each country. And this capacity only leads to slow development of varieties. It's interesting for us to mention about the collaborative efforts on breeding. And so breeders from national public institutions heavily depend on collaboration with CGIAR centers. And this arrangement is helpful and reduces the cost and time for breeding and variety development. This arrangement also ensures participation in germplasm selection, access to new breeding technologies, and data access. However, this particular arrangement reduces the capacity of local breeders to produce varieties and creates a dependency on CGIAR centers. Among the traits of beans for these particular countries, many recently released bean varieties emphasize nutritional value, such as high iron bean, and also climate smart features of drought tolerance and early maturity. To highlight this, we found 3 varieties of these traits in Burundi and 5 in Congo. Some of the breeding technologies that are currently employed in this region includes pedigree and recurrent selection, among many others. With this status, we highlight that there's a limited number of bean breeders in these countries operating on constrained infrastructure and facing funding challenges to improve the breeding capacity and maintain collaborations. The private sector also mentioned that the varieties available in the country catalogs do not meet their demand. Next slide. On variety adoption, we found out that all varieties have persisted in the region's market to about 30 years of popular varieties. This indicates a low varietal turnover and a limited rate of innovation and adoption for new varieties across the region. The average number of varieties sold annually across the country is approximately 15 from our findings, which suggests that there is presence of choice of varieties to farmers, but this does not include new varieties. Farmers, especially smallholders, face challenges in accessing quality seeds and knowledge of improved agronomic practices, including the limited use of certified seeds. Stakeholders that we interviewed expressed satisfaction on efforts in the promotion of varieties in their countries, but there's still more initiatives to be taken through public-private partnerships. The private sector has invested in promotion through demonstration plots, field days, distribution of print materials, and radio advertisement. The question that we ask ourselves today is that why the investment in variety promotion and this presence of good awareness of new varieties by stakeholders, but these efforts still lead to low adoption rate. I will now hand over to my colleague Camille, who will take us through the subsequent sections. Over to you, Camille.
Thank you very much, Stephen. So we'll now continue the presentation with the next topic, which is about seed production. So regarding seed production, we looked at different topics. The first one is the private sector's engagement in seed production and marketing locally. So what we noticed is that international companies are present in these 4 countries, but in general, mostly dealing with high-value seeds. Can be hybrid maize, can be vegetable, but most of the time they are not involved in bean seed production and commercialization. Seed companies' engagement is minimal. So here I'm talking about also local seed companies. So their engagement is minimal on common bean seed production and distribution. For example, in Rwanda, we found that 3% of the annual seed requirement is supplied by local seed companies. Generally speaking, the bean seed production is mostly done by small companies, can be also farmer group, farmer cooperative, who are involved in this activity. There is also the informal seed sector, but also an intermediary seed sector that are the two sectors that contribute the most to the seed used by farmers. And this is due to the limited accessibility and availability of quality seed of improved varieties, but also lack of awareness of the value of quality seed. So there is probably a lot of work to do on these aspects. We also noted that the access to and availability and access to early generation seed is rated quite good in Tanzania and Rwanda, 80% satisfaction rate, and only 60% in Burundi and DR Congo. However, there is still constrained availability of these EGS from the public research institution, and of course this hinders the seed production capacity. So still about seed production, we looked at the local seed trade association, if they exist and how they are organized, etc. So here we found two different approaches. Say in Rwanda and Tanzania, we found two well-structured local seed trade association with staff, with websites or communication channels in place. More specifically in Rwanda, the National Seed Association of Rwanda also opens itself at the international level. They are a member of the International Seed Federation. They have also developed partnership with ISTA, the International Seed Testing Association, to set international standards in the Rwandan seed sector. On the other side, in DR Congo and Burundi, we found in Burundi the Coprosebu, which is equivalent to a national seed trade association. It's more like a group of seed production cooperative. And same in Congo, there is Unagrico, which is also a national union of producers in Congo. So this one is national, but also the specificity of Congo is that there are also several provincial seed associations here. We also looked at the role of the governments in the seed distribution, and we found that governments are highly involved through different approaches. The first one can be through subsidy programs, can be on a number of crops, in general focusing on maize, but some programs also included beans. Some countries also, for example, like Burundi and Tanzania, also have parastatal entities who are involved in the seed production and marketing of certified seeds, or these entities can also be here to support the development of private companies from a technical point of view, for example. Another area of intervention from government is the development and implementation of policies to encourage private sector. For example, this is an example in Rwanda that we found, where the government was the main seed producer and distributor before 2020, and then through a specific policy, they encouraged private companies to enter to the seed sector. We also looked at other players, and we found that NGOs are still a very important player in the seed sector. They support seed production, they also support seed dissemination. And the last point here is about seed imports by governments. In some countries, the seed demand is higher than the available offer, and to meet the demand, the government is also accessing more seeds outside of the country through imports. This is again mostly for maize, we found examples and data about beans. Now we'll discuss a bit about the regulatory environment. We looked firstly at national seed laws and policy. What we found is that the 4 countries have relatively recent national seed regulation and decrees in place to regulate all the key aspects of the seed sector, like variety registration, seed production and seed certification, seed companies, seed producers, registration, seed import and export procedures, etc. In terms of seed certification systems and quality assurance systems, they are mostly public and done and coordinated through public inspectors. However, Burundi has accredited some private inspectors since 2018, so this is now functional. There was the same initiative in DR Congo. We are not able to identify at this stage if this was now implemented and in place. Regarding the informal or other type of government agencies, we found that the QDS, the quality declared seeds, and other informal seed type are recognized in the seed laws of these countries. And even specific example we wanted to mention is in some countries like Tanzania, the QDS system is promoted by the government. It's not only recognized, it's really promoted by the government to offer an alternative to seed from the informal sector, and also where, for example, they have challenges to implement the formal certification process due to geographic challenges and difficulty to have the inspectors traveling to the field, to the seed production field. And this specific policy has led to a significant increase of the QDS quantity produced in Tanzania, multiplied by 5 between 2015 and 2019. So then we also looked at the regional seed regulation level. And what is interesting to see is that the 4 countries belong to different regional groups. We have COMESA, the Common Market for Eastern and Southern Africa. We have SADC, Southern African Development Community, and EAC, the East Africa Community. And all the countries belong at least to two regional groups, and Congo belongs to the three groups. So all these 3 groups have harmonized procedure for seed variety registration, seed certification and quality assurance, quarantine, phytosanitary measures, and regional seed trade. COMESA and SADC have more experience in this. EAC is still at early stage of implementation of this regulation. The goal, of course, for these regional systems is to promote economies of scale, promote regional trade, and also improve the ability to nations to exchange seeds and respond to food shocks when it happens. And of course, from this regulation, the states and the regional economic blocs expect specific benefits, like more investments, because market is potentially bigger. So more investments and more seed production, seed commercialization, dynamism in the region, more competition between actors that can play at a bigger level. So still on this regional harmonized regulation. So as I said, it's in place and working in SADC and COMESA, still starting in EAC. So, however, we wanted to highlight that this regulation currently is mostly used for commercial crop, for example, like maize, but they are almost not used for crops like common bean. And for common bean breeding and variety ownership is largely dominated by public sector. And if we look at these two pie charts, we can see that public varieties represent only 8% of the total number of varieties in the COMESA catalog, which means that 92% are private varieties. In SADC, it's even bigger. Private varieties represent 99% of the total catalog, while public varieties represent only 1%. On this bar chart on the right, we can see that common bean only has one public variety in the SADC catalog and no in the COMESA. All the remaining varieties are private in these catalogs. The last point we wanted to discuss and to present regarding the regulatory environment is about the GMO regulation status. So here we noted that 3 countries, so Democratic Republic of Congo, Burundi, and Rwanda, don't have biosafety law, don't have GM field trial, and of course, don't have GM seed commercialized in the country. So we can see here they are gray in the 2 maps. So the first map is about the existence of biosafety law. The second map is about commercialization of GM seeds and crops. Tanzania is a bit different. They don't have biosafety law, but they implemented trials, GM field trials in the past. But they put it on hold. I think it was in around 2021, and they put it on hold. And so far, so GM seed and crop are not allowed, and it's pending for decision from government. So now we would like to conclude this presentation with some recommendations that we would like to share with you for each of the 4 topics that we presented today. So regarding breeding systems and pipeline of varieties, our first suggestion here would be to have more breeders involved to breed and create varieties, specifically with climate smart and higher value traits to replace the old varieties that persist in the market. And these varieties should also meet the key customer needs, such as private sector and farmers through a demand-led approach. If you remember, Stephen explained that the varieties, most of the new varieties don't meet the value chain actors' needs. Last point regarding on this topic would be to continue searching of opportunities for obtaining external funding through collaboration, and I would even say through structured and coordinated approach with stakeholders. So developing partnerships to raise funds and in order to create varieties and be able to deliver them to the market. Regarding the seed variety adoption, we would recommend to adopt and expand strategies such as the bean corridor approach by the Pan-Africa Bean Research Alliance, PABRA, that supports and improves varietal turnover, intensification of the bean production, and also marketing and consumption. So this is a strategy that has proved its efficacy, and we recommend to adopt and expand it in these countries. We also believe that updating and making available the national variety catalogs would be also very important to have to facilitate access to the information about what is registered, what is available, what are the specific traits, etc. It's an essential tool to communicate and promote new varieties. Last point here is about structured collaboration and partnership between stakeholders in the national seed system. Can consider public and private actors to promote adoption and release of improved varieties. Can be, yes, NGOs, donors, small farmers, and other value chain actors. Regarding the seed production, our recommendation here would be to strengthen the seed sector on bean through the development of partnerships and strategies with private sector, including independent seed producers, of course, to build their capacities and also increase their involvement in the bean seed systems. We would also recommend to involve more the National Seed Association and its members in public-private partnerships. So we have seen in the presentation they can have significant different forms and shapes depending on the countries, but we believe their role is important also to produce seeds, disseminate, and also even at the earlier step to be part of to contribute to the breeding strategies. We also believe in value chain partnership, not only seed value chain, but also grain. And we believe that the structuring and connecting seed and grain value chain would help. Value chain can secure demand on specific varieties with specific traits on quality grain, and of course, quality seeds that are needed to produce. Last point about seed production is to increase investment in the early generation seed production, including better seed production planning strategies between the different actors to make sure the right quantities are produced and availed at the right time to the right persons. Last section of this conclusion is about the regulatory environment. And here our recommendation would be to explore and stimulate possible regional initiatives, could be on breeding, variety registration, seed production, commercialization, etc., to take advantage of these regional harmonized seed regulation schemes for wider bean varieties adoption. So the system is used by private sector for private varieties, so they have benefits to use the system, and we believe that the system could be also could benefit the bean value chain. We also suggest to build seed producers' capacity to better understand and adopt good seed quality standards. So as we saw, most of the seed sector for bean is informal or called intermediary. So it could, and this, of course, will remain and constitute a significant part of the seed sector. So we would recommend to build capacities of these actors to make sure the seeds that deliver are good. Can be certified seed, can be QDS or any other type of seed, but at the end, the most important is to have quality seeds. Last point here is about national seed strategy. We found that countries like DR Congo don't have a clear national seed strategy, and we would recommend to invest in this to set clear strategy to make sure that crops like legumes can be actively promoted and supported by the government. That's the end of our presentation, and we thank you for your attention, and we are happy to answer any question you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camille and Stephen, for that enlightening presentation on the seed systems in the East African region. Unfortunately, there may not be time now to make some comments on the reflections. I see there are quite some in the chat, but keep them coming, and Camille and Stephen will be on standby to respond to them in real time. At this moment, we would like to take a 15 minutes break to stretch, and we come back here at 10:45 a.m. Central Africa time to continue with the rest of the program. So see you then. Welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. In case you are joining us now, this is to let you know that the purpose of this convening is to hear from you specifically on your experience with the legume value chain in the region towards drawing the gaps and the research priorities that could address those gaps. So for that, kindly share your questions, comments, or reflections on the chat section, and the team will be in a position to respond to you in real time. At this point, we move on to the next TLT presentation. I would like to introduce Dr. Esther Tuguna Mungai, who is a senior scientist with a vast experience in agricultural sector. She has been working with smallholder farmers since 1996 in sub-Saharan Africa with research interest in gender dynamics in the agricultural sector, women participation in agricultural food systems, and the intersection of issues that leads to the transformation of systems and empowerment of especially women and youth. Esther is serving as the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Lead for the Legume Systems Innovation Lab. Welcome and give us a presentation on gender and social inclusion.
Thank you so much, Simon. Kindly confirm that you can hear me well.
Yes, I can hear you well. Please proceed.
Thank you so much. Good morning, good afternoon, good day, everyone. I'm very delighted to make this presentation today. And I'm very glad that my colleagues have already talked about seed systems. And for this particular session, we want to focus on gender equality and social inclusion with a special focus on the region that we are talking about today, Tanzania, DRC Congo, Burundi, and Rwanda. And what I thought we should start to do is to present on an understanding of what GESI is and maybe what it will mean for us as we move forward. Because the gender space is one of those spaces where you have a lot of definitions and a lot of possibilities, but we want to start giving some kind of definition of what we are talking about. So GESI in this case stands for Gender Equality and Social Inclusion. And as we talk about equality and equity, we just wanted to bring a little bit of a stylized diagram that helps us to understand the difference, and because that might influence some of the definitions that we'll be having as we go forward. And here, GESI is standing for a framework or an approach that will ensure the development of programs, policies, and projects considering and addressing diverse needs and diverse interests and capacities of the individuals that we are working with in the areas where we work. And as we talk about this, we would like to promote equity. And the term equity and equality have been used interchangeably in most of the spaces where we work. But we just would like to say we might be leaning a little bit more to equity because we think even though equality is a very good goal, a strategic goal, sometimes it may lead to situations where we may leave out some people in the areas where we work. If you look at the picture that we have on our left, it's on the left on my screen. I don't know if it's still on the left on yours. We see a provision of a bicycle that is exactly the same, which might be the need that has been identified in a region. But because of the diverse needs of the people that are targeted, we see that the child is suffering, the disabled person is suffering, and the gentleman is suffering, while maybe the woman is getting a good deal in this delivery. But if we start to think about the specific needs of the people, the diverse needs of those people, then we start designing projects and programs that respond to their needs. And so our bicycle in the lower part will be responding to the specific needs of the people and making sure that everybody is comfortable. So that is what we would like to look at. That's what we would like to focus on even as we go ahead. And as we reviewed the work in the East African region and also in the Great Lakes region, there are three institutions that are coming out as strong actors in the gender integration space. And the first one is the Pan-African Bean Research Alliance, which is led by CIAT, and it involves the National Agricultural Research System actors from the region. And this alliance brings together different actors, different stakeholders that are in the value chain. And as part of that, the team has had an opportunity to have collaborated around the gender issues. So we think this is a great opportunity that has already started delivering on this, ensuring that there are capacities in each country within the bean value chain actors. There's a stakeholder who is responsible for gender integration. And where there is such a gap, then the PABRA Alliance is able to notify or to identify that gap and respond to it. We've also had a very amazing program that is delivered by Makerere and Cornell universities, the Gender Responsive Researchers Equipped for Agricultural Transformation, which is a transformational program that brings together breeders and social scientists from the regions, bringing them into a training that talks about what gender is, what gender integration is, what is gender transformation. And the participants of this research, this capacity development training, have had the opportunity to then go back to their institutions and actually deliver on transforming their gender program, their breeding programs with a gender lens. And then there is the concept that has also been promoted by the, especially PABRA, on the multi-stakeholder platforms, and where these platforms are aligned to the bean value chain, then it gives an opportunity for a platform where gender issues are discussed and women are involved and the youth are involved. And these three institutions have influenced the delivery of gender work in the region. I'm sure this will come out in the other presentations, but definitely just to say that beans in this ESSA and Great Lakes region is a very important legume. In most of those countries, you'll find that the bean is either the second or the first or the second important legume in terms of production, in terms of area, in terms of per capita consumption. I was actually pleasantly surprised to note that in this region, we have some of the highest per capita consumptions in the world, sometimes going up to 60 kilograms per person per year. And what that means is that gender responsive breeding and delivery and any impact that is positive for the bean value chain then has a high opportunity for impacting livelihoods in this region. In some texts, it has been identified that the bean is a woman's crop, but in most places, this is also changing because the bean is becoming a commercial crop. And as commercialization engages, then the role of the women in the higher nodes of aggregation, processing, and trading of bean, we don't see a big participation of women, although that is something that we would desire to do. Bean is a food security crop, and in cases where there is malnutrition, the bean has been used as an entry point for biofortification and improvement of nutrition security in countries. And the role that women have in food preparation, in food delivery at the household level, and choice of meals then becomes a very important entry for gender integration choices. And of course, there is a lot of trade across borders between countries because of the different seasons, the different times in the year when the bean crop is maturing in the different countries. You'll find that there's a lot of back and forth in terms of trade around beans. Some of it formal, some of it informal across borders. And there's a lot of opportunity for women economic empowerment in the bean value chain. And we have also noticed in literature that the bean research programs in most of the countries are quite old. We see, for example, I think in 1933, Burundi bean program was starting to have its first varieties from Guatemala, which is interesting because that means there's a lot of history, there's a lot of learning, and there is a lot of opportunities for gender integration in the process. And what we have seen is that although the bean is important in all these countries. There is a bean research program that's happening, and we have all these actors that are playing an important stimulating role in terms of gender integration. Not all countries are at the same level in terms of how far they have progressed in terms of gender. And I wanted to highlight the case of Burundi, which is, I think, an interesting case. Out of the 4 countries, we see very specific phases of gender integration and the growth in the trajectory of gender integration in the bean value chain. Before 2015, the bean program in Burundi focused more on the agronomic traits, looking at pest resistance and productivity of beans. And the breeders and the agronomists were leading that program. And even though women were playing a role in especially the production of beans, their input is not documented in a significant way. But between 2015 and 2018, we see the Swiss Development Cooperation funding a project in which gender integration was one of the key deliverables and strategic objectives. And out of that program, the researchers from the National Research Organization in Burundi attended the GREAT training. And out of that, we see that team of researchers then come and do a lot of participatory varietal selection, including gender into that, a lot of value chain analysis, including gender into that, and a lot of market studies and including gender into that. And what we start to see post 2018 is that there's emerging a neater structure of gender integration, where tools become part of the conversation, and you'll see that we have the PVS tools that are designed and available for everyone, gender product profiling tools that are aligned to the breeding objectives, and those are available, and a lot of collaboration between the scientists of the different disciplines that are working on beans. And what we start to see then is that out of the assessments that have been done, including traits that are important to men and women, the breeders are not only focusing on agronomic traits, but they are now also focusing on traits that are important in the market and processing. And we see the short cooking time trait, for example, becoming very important. The iron and zinc beans biofortification becoming very important, and Harvest Plus contributing into that space significantly. So we start to see that very dynamic interaction in terms of gender and the other scientists in the bean value chain, which is an exciting observation. And what we also start to see is that there are actually publications out there that are now focused on gender topics in the bean value chain, and the most recent ones from Muroki and Nchanji between 2023 and 2024. And although the Burundi case is very neat in its like the phases we go through from 2015, 2018, and then post 2018, we don't have exactly the same kind of neat progression in Tanzania, Rwanda, and DRC, but there is focuses and concentrations of how gender is integrated in these value chains. And of course, the work that is now coming up is we see there are differences in terms of the gender capacities in the different NAS partners, but because of the opportunity that GREAT has, there is the possibility that even as we go forward, then that would be an opportunity we take advantage of to bring capacities to the same level. We have the multi-stakeholder platforms as an opportunity for integration that we can also take advantage of. And of course, the coordination that is within PABRA in terms of gender coordination, that also being an opportunity. And some of the gaps that we would then be looking at would be harmonizing like the kind of data that is collected, sex disaggregation of data, agreeing on metrics and indicators to follow, and maybe going further to even implementing studies around, for example, the WEA as an index that would help us harmonize the kind of work that is delivered as we design the projects to the next level. So as we go forward, we would want to see how we improve the implementation of Jesse in the legume systems research and development work in the region. And of course, this will be based a lot on the projects that go through the call. But we are hoping that we can start looking at the bean value chain as a basis for analysis, looking from not just reaching, but pushing towards benefit, empowerment, and transformation in terms of the gender work that is done and integrated. And of course, looking at the diverse stakeholders, because the focus so far has been mostly between men and women, but we also understand that maybe in our systems, there could be diverse stakeholders. We want to think about the youth, we want to think about young women that are unmarried, that maybe are playing a role in the value chains. We want to see how they can work beyond just production to the next levels of value chain, because the bean is a bit advanced in terms of the value chain development in the markets and the processing. And of course, if possible, it will be interesting if we can have common indicators for measuring progress, and where is maybe one of the examples that we'd want to look at, and looking at also gender transformative approaches. And of course, as I have mentioned, the capacity development using maybe the GREAT approach and having that coordination through PABRA. And of course, monitoring and being very open to adaptive learning, because some of the lessons may come from the people's stories as they engage with the bean value chain. And so I think I've already mentioned the gender disaggregation of data, the value chain analysis, and the metrics that we will be working with going forward. And so some of the key strategies we hope that we'll be looking at is looking at the MSP as a very unique entry point, as a participatory process, policy advocacy, and gender responsive budgeting. We would want to see, as the proposals come in, as people make their proposals, that they are also considering their gender work and also funding it appropriately, so that the work is also is promised to be delivered. And on, of course, the socio-technical bundling, where we have the technical, the finances, the technologies, the norms, working together towards advancing the development of the bean value chain would be something that we would be interested in. And of course, the monitoring, learning and evaluation. So thank you very much for the opportunity to present. And this work is funded by the United States Agency for International Development as part of the FEED, the Future Innovation Lab for Legume Systems Research. But the opinions that are in this presentation are definitely the others, and we appreciate very much the support that we have received from many stakeholders in this region as we prepared this desk review. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Esther, for that stimulating presentation. I see there are some few questions on the chat, on the Q&A, maybe that you would be interested to respond to. You are muted in case you're speaking.
Yeah, I've just seen that I'm muted. Sorry about that. How are women involved in value addition in the bean value chain, for example, processing? We would be very interested to see how women are involved in value addition of the bean value chain. What we have seen is there's a lot of collectives around, for example, seed production, learning and agronomy around bean varieties. And when it comes to like the processed beans that are going into like the supermarket, the pre-cooked beans, those start getting into the industry. So you don't see a lot of processing of the commercial lines that are going into the industry. But for those that are doing like the bean flours and making cakes and making snacks at the household, they're still at a small scale. So this is one area that we'd like to see, because we assume that processing and marketing would bring a lot of value, a lot of possible women economic empowerment, and we would be open to the possibility of learning a little bit more on this, and getting a proposal around women engagement in bean processing and value addition would be exciting for us. I don't know whether there is another one, but that's the one I see. Simon.
Okay. Thank you very much, Esther. Let's keep the questions coming for Esther, and she can respond to them in the course of time as well. So I see we still have more time for this session, but now that there are no more questions for Esther at this time, we can donate that to the next session. We will like to break out into smaller groups to continue these discussions on the two topics that have been presented to us this morning on the seed systems and gender and social inclusion. So we will have more time for the breakout session, at which time we will all return back to the main room where we will hear a brief report out from each group. So you will be automatically assigned to a breakout room. And in your breakout room, you'll be asked to provide your input and insights on the seed systems and GESI topics that have been discussed. And the Legume Lab will follow up with written correspondences on this topic or questions. So if your group does not get enough time to discuss all the questions, you will still have the opportunity to share your expertise through written format following this event. So each breakout room will be starting with a different question, just to ensure that at least there is a deep dive into the two topics that have been discussed this morning. So if David or Steve, you are ready, you could provide the breakout rooms. And it's good that we get to hear some feedback from the rapporteurs from each of the groups. So I would want to invite the rapporteur for group number 1 to have like 5 minutes of sharing some insights from the discussion within your group. I don't know who was the rapporteur for group number 1, please.
Yes, I'm on Physician Fourier. I will be giving a summary of our discussion from the group 1. And on the gender equality and social inclusion, we talk about the formulation of products and the inclusion of farmers' needs in the product profiling, in the breeding process. We said that there are some malnutrition issues and protein lack in East Africa, and in the breeding pipeline, those should also be targeted. And women and youth should be provided some skills in the adoption of new varieties, and the product should be competitive on the markets. We said we should also create diversity in the products, in beans products, to create market niche, like biscuits from beans. We have some issues about the adoption of beans varieties because of for too long cooking time, and researchers and farmers from East Africa have started making some processed beans for commercialization, but still the level of commercialization is very low on the market, and there is need to change the behavior of farmers and stakeholders in the choice of processed beans products, and also the adoption of short cooking time varieties. We realized that in our discussion that most of farmers in a rural area, particularly women group, are present in the meeting, but when it comes to the adoption of new technologies, the adoption is very, very low. So we need to find out the reason why they are not adopting the new technologies. And in some countries, particularly in Tanzania, there is no labor shortage in the production system. And in the market, but in the market, there is a labor shortage. We suggest that the introduction of planting and harvesting machinery, particularly for threshing and planting in the bean production, could also solve the issue of labor shortage on the production system. For the seed system and variety development, we realize that there are two different systems. We have a formal and informal seed system. While the formal system provides quality seeds, provides certified seeds, which are very low adopted by farmers. And in the informal seed system, we have land raisers with very low quality, but that is mostly adopted by farmers in the production system. We said farmers should be encouraged to adopt the quality seeds, and there is need to create awareness. Farmers, they use the seeds with very low quality, and because they are not able to keep the genetic purity of the varieties they are using. And some private sectors are involved in this seed production because of awareness creation. We also talk about private sector that think there is no market for the beans. Since beans is a self-pollinated crop, farmers can still recycle their products every season. In East Africa, most of farmers get their seed from relatives, neighbors, friends, local markets. And very few farmers buy their seed from the agro-market seed companies. So there is need to create trust in buying seed from the shop. The other issue we discussed about that discourage farmers for buying seeds from agrovet is the increase of the price in addition to the trust, because farmers will trust more their neighbors than agrovet seed companies. And we also discuss about a fear between private and public sector to avoid competition. Most of private sectors, they don't want to compete with public sectors in terms of seed production and commercialization. I think I gave the majority part of our point we discussed in our session. I hope I cover most of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Symphorian. That is quite detailed. Can we get feedback from group number 2? The rapporteur for group number 2.
Which group is that, Simon?
Should be us.
Yeah, I think it's us,
I
isn't it?
think.
Yes, please.
Yes, John,
Yeah.
yes.
Great. Okay, I'm reporting out on behalf of our group. This group was very ably led by Fora Obebo. Our group had a very rich discussion around the two topics. I'll start with the seed systems. In response to the question whether the seed systems are adequate in the region, one of our participants opined that the answer is both yes and no. That although there are many varieties available and there's often quick adoption of new varieties, that there's also quick disadoption of those varieties. And the result is that the seed systems are not sustainable in that sense. Often the farmer's adoption follows the subsidies. In other words, when a seed is subsidized, the farmers will adopt it, but they will abandon it as soon as the subsidies end or as soon as another or better subsidy comes along. And so there's a bit of distortion in the way that seeds get adopted, and also currently the way these adoptions take place, they're not well sustainable. Another problem with the adoption is that there is inadequate information available to farmers. And so often they'll adopt seeds that are inadequately prepared for their particular agro ecozones. something that is developed in the lowlands will be tried in the highlands, and it will fail there because it wasn't bred for that region. And the result is that often farmers get discouraged, and once again, they drop these new varieties because they were not, the varieties were not developed for their particular area. There's also a problem with varieties that have strong resistance pre-harvest, but then have no resistance post-harvest. And so, although farmers are encouraged by the higher yields, when it comes to getting those particular varieties to market, there are serious issues in storage and loss to storage pests. And so farmers find that it's not ultimately sustainable, and they once again go back to some of the land races or some of the traditional varieties that they've used in the past. There's also a struggle to provide, as I mentioned, good information. Farmers are not sure what varieties they should be using, and even when they are sure, often there are counterfeits, or there are similar varieties that, although they appear similar to the varieties that they should be adopting, when it comes to the actual planting of those particular seeds, it becomes clear that they do not have the same traits as the variety that was recommended. And so farmers need to be trained and informed on how to carefully select the varieties that they use to avoid falling for counterfeits or falling for what are mistaken identification of varieties. Bean weevils are very aggressive in the post-harvest stage, and new technologies are definitely needed. I'll put an aside in here. We are developing a bruchid-resistant bean in Southern Africa currently, which would be potentially could be potentially bred into the market classes in East Africa and the Great Lakes region as well. So there are new technologies available, but to the point of Emmanuel, who brought this up, those new varieties are not yet available in East Africa and the Great Lakes. So that's something also that could be worked on. There's a strong opinion in our group that seed systems should be community-based or community-owned. There are, of course, great advantages to community seed production. It makes sure that there is seed available to farmers, but there are often problems of quality control in these community-based seed production systems. And so more has to be done to make that kind of expertise available to community members, so that the seed that is produced is, in fact, an improvement on the seed that might be available through Save Seed, or that might be available in the market. So community-based seed production, yes, but there has to be better quality control. It was also pointed out that although government storage is available, farmers are not using it, once again, due to poor post-harvest management. And so farmers are going directly to market rather than using storage, which is, it's unfortunate because higher prices could be obtained, but there needs to be more knowledge of, more awareness of, and more use of post-harvest management to avoid the kind of losses that are currently occurring in these silo systems, and to encourage farmers once again to deposit their grain in those silos. There's also a big disconnect between the cost of seed and increased yields. Farmers are quick to point out that seed is expensive, but they are not doing the cost-benefit calculation of the benefit that would accrue to them as a result of the increased yields. And so there has to be more time taken. And once again, this is an information issue. More time has to be taken to inform farmers and train them on the benefits of using quality seed. And this is true also for consumers, that although there are biofortified varieties available that give great benefit to the consumer, nevertheless, consumers are unaware of these advantages. And so although they're being produced, they're not being bought, they're not being consumed. And so there has to be better alignment between the production systems
and the consumption systems. There's a need to create what was called by one of our group members an end-to-end system of information, so that not only farmers but also consumers, all of them are working based on the same information that's being shared across the entire system. Then in the Jesse area, beans have traditionally been a subsistence crop in East and the East Africa and the Great Lakes region, and that when it's a subsistence crop, it falls primarily to women. But once a crop becomes commercialized, then men step in and they take over the direction of those crops. It was mentioned that it would be worth studying whether women's plots or men's plots yield better. There's really no data available on this, whether women actually outproduce men when they manage the plots, but it falls into this same pattern every time, that women are allotted those plots when it's a subsistence issue, but as soon as it becomes a commercial issue, women get pushed off those plots and then the men take over. So no one's really looking at whether or not women are in fact more efficient at producing the crops than men are. That goes for decision making as well. There needs to be a study of intra-household systems. How do decisions get made? There needs to be a better understanding of what the advantages of women versus men's participation in various parts of the value chain are. Women tend to operate in the less valuable segments of the value chain, not because they choose to, but because when there's value, once again, that's where men step in. There's a lot of opportunity for youth and women, both in production and in post-production, especially in processed foods. Value added, there's not a lot being done currently in these areas, but this could be expanded dramatically, and there's lots of good examples of women-led and youth-led businesses that have taken on the challenge of creating value-added products from legumes. Also, there's a role for youth, especially to play in extension. This is an area where many youth have stepped in and are using their mobility and their awareness of technology to be able to reach farmers in the field. And so what we concluded is that the opportunities are there. It's just a question of getting that out, getting the information out to women and youth, that there is a place for them in these value chains, and that if they should take advantage of them, there's great benefit to be had. And then just one final observation was that where women lead businesses, where women lead businesses, they tend to do a better job of using the skills and also the knowledge of women than men-led businesses do. And so it might be worth looking at what are the special dynamics of these women-led businesses that makes them so much more effective at using the talents of women than men-led businesses. And with that, I'll turn it back to you. Thank you, Simon.
Excellent and comprehensive feedback there, John, with the interesting conclusions. Well, we move on to group number 3, the rapporteur for group number 3, to give us some feedback from their discussions.
Yeah, thank you very much. We had a good discussion. The team was rich in information and the numbers. I think good gender representation. We had 3 ladies, 3 guys. So what we address were things to do with the seed system and variety development. So the first question was, does the current seed production system adequately provide quality seed? If no, where are the roadblocks? What is preventing the system from adequately supplying quality seed? So on the first point, we said, first issue is the no adequate production of seeds, since many households produce beans or legumes in small scale and tend to recycle their seeds from previous seasons. Number 2, bean availability or seed availability and marketing information sharing is weak. So there's a need to enhance uptake. For instance, we have iron-rich beans, which is not so much known about in the country, but the information is localized in some regions. Then there's also a need to develop bean varieties with the low anti-nutritional factors, e.g. tannins, phytic acid, and polyphenols, to enhance nutritional uptake by the population. As well as there's a need for high bean content, high protein content rather, with a good amino acid profile, which is also combined with a high or good fatty acid profile. Thereafter, then we also need beans with a low cooking time and good cooking quality. So the roadblock that were identified by the team included inadequate information availabilities by the farmers and consumers, because in most consumers, beans is beans. The farmers, with no much information, better information flow, be it in the social media, the mainstream media, then there's less knowledge on this bean variety that have been developed. Then there's lack of intentional marketing and market linkages that should be done to ensure more people embrace the new bean varieties. Thereafter, we'll also felt there's inadequate supportive policy framework in terms of seed production, multiplication, distribution, and marketing, that's commercialization. Then we also have a lot weak link in post-harvest management, leading to losses of seeds because of particularly drying and threshing. Then we have a lot of pests, and also we still have counterfeits in the markets, because someone will just take beans, they decorate them in a color and they sell them. Then approval also takes long, as that's the last bottleneck that we identified. Then what could raise private seed sector interest in investing in beans or cowpea seed business? The first thing that was identified would be government incentive to motivate the private sector players. The next one, demand for seeds. The size of the market should be big enough to motivate private investors to invest. Then access to credit facilities is also needed to enable private sector investment. Then favorable policy for private sector investment is also required in terms of regulations. Then licensing rights to particular varieties is also needed for private sector. So giving of IP rights, especially for a few who will be able to push the varieties that have been developed, is needed. Then there's a need to engage earlier on with the private sector players, so that they also play a role and also give their input during the breeding, as well as across the various value chain roles like processing. Then what obstacles have been encountered in approaches to foster cooperation between public and private sector to improve the system? One thing that was noted was that the regulations, mostly GMO regulations, has been tight in most of East Africa. So this has hindered the adoption or approval of new seed varieties. The next one was poor communication and coordination between the private and public sector. Thereafter, we have government involvement in distribution of seeds when it's supposed to provide supportive business environment for private sector to thrive. The next question was, do we have the right pipeline of varieties to answer market and farmers' needs? We felt it was yes, we have enough pipeline because there's a lot of breeding going on, but there's a weakness in approval and marketing links. So this doesn't make most of them to see the light of the day or the market. Other than that, there's poor information flow in the legume value chain as compared to the maize value chain, because for maize, people know which maize can be planted where, and then the seeds are normally found in those places in good time. Thereafter, number 5, we look at what research will help us answer these challenges. The first one will be looking at legume market dynamic assessment, then gender dynamic with commercialization of legume value chain, so that we can answer the changing role gender plays as we commercialize the value chain. Then the role of technology in the value chain, be it IT or mechanization. Those are the three areas that we felt could be looked at when we're looking at research. So that sums up our views on this. Otherwise, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frederick, for that very interesting and valuable feedback and additional dimension to our conversations today. We can hear now from the feedback from the last group number 4, the rapporteur, please.
Yes, Simon, thank you.
Please, okay.
Yes, so I'll be sharing the feedback for my group. I think we started from whether there are policy fees available on the market. And the response was that there are policy fees when you look at the formal sector. But however, the dominant sector is the informal sector, where farmers mostly exchange beans amongst themselves. The problem with this is that they don't always know how to handle the seeds properly before replanting, and that can lead to diseases or decreased yield. Okay, so in terms of the proper business model, I think the consensus was public-private partnerships that was encouraged by the team as a model which is acceptable, and also contract farming. So in terms of the public-private partnerships, governments coming in to support the private sector to start producing seeds for beans. And then in terms of contract farming, private sector coming in and giving the seeds to farmers, and then they produce the crops, and then when the yield comes in, then the farmers can share it between the farmers and then the producers. I think one other model that came up was for farmer cooperatives to come together to produce the seeds themselves for the farmers. This is a practice that's happening in Kenya and then in Uganda. Okay, so for the next question, as to the barriers of public-private partnerships, some of the points that came up were lack of regulators or facilitators. So how do we ensure that the private-public partnerships are being regulated fairly? How do we facilitate what is happening? How do we ensure that each of them knows the roles that they are playing within the partnership? So that was one of the barriers that came up. Another one was lack of access to capital by the farmers, especially if the PPP is not, the public side is not providing the financial. This means that the farmer needs to provide the money themselves, and that can be a barrier to the partnership. Another barrier is lack of knowledge by farmers. So for example, if farmers are not aware of how these type of partnerships work, if they are not aware of what is expected of them, that can also be a barrier to the public-private partnerships. So the next question that we tried to answer was, okay, if the varieties that is currently on the market respond to farmers' needs and also to market needs. For that comment, the general consensus was yes, there are varieties on the market that respond to farmers' needs, that respond to market needs. Basically, what was said is that usually before the varieties are brought on the market, it is vetted and approved by farmers before they actually put it out there. So one of the questions that came up was, are we saying that farmers are also positive for the market? And I think one member mentioned the fact that usually farmers know what is happening on the market. So they usually request for produce that farmers would want, that the market would want. So I think the last point was what research would help to answer the aforementioned challenges. And in terms of what the barriers are with PPP, the varieties, and then in terms of the seed production. One main thing that came up was for research to be done on the various stakeholders within the value chain. For example, we need to know what the actors are doing and what are their needs. So there needs to be a comprehensive analysis. Another point that came up was for research to be done on the variety of seeds being produced and their various benefits, so that the kind of produce that would be put out there would be consumer-led. And I think the final point was to ensure that breeding programs in various regions will be sustained and also scaled up to ensure that it has a far reach. Thank you. Yes, Simon,
Thank
please
you.
go ahead again.
Yes, thank you very much, Miriam. Excellent feedback there. We thank each one of you for sharing those feedbacks and insights. Your contributions are not only valuable but also essential in enriching the discussions we are having here and also the overall experience with the legume value chain. Of course, as I said before, the Legume Lab will follow up with written correspondences on these topical questions. And we can continue with these discussions also on the chat section. So at this point, we would want to take a lunch break. We will take around 50 minutes lunch break. We return at 20 minutes past 1 Central African time to continue with the rest of the program. So we can meet then, at least we can keep time. That will be great. Thank you and see you then. Welcome back. Welcome back to the afternoon session. And we thank you for your continued active participation and contributions to this topic. As I said earlier, this convening is about your feedback and insights on the gaps in the value chain and opportunities to address those gaps within the Eastern African region. So keep the conversations going in the chat and the questions coming in the Q&A section during and after the presentations. So at this time, we will hear from Dr. Eliud Birachi on multi-stakeholder platforms. Eliud is a project leader at the Alliance of Biodiversity International and SEAT, working in Africa as a market economist and value chain specialist under the Pan-African Bean Research Alliance. Recent work focuses on agricultural commercialization as a climate smart enterprise accelerator for SMEs, multi-stakeholder platforms and processes, gender empowerment, and rural employment in agricultural dependent systems. Alliance for Biodiversity International and SEAT leads the multi-stakeholder activities for the Legume Systems Innovation Lab. Welcome, Dr. Eliud Birachi.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Eliud Birachi from Alliance of Biodiversity and SEAT, based in Kigali, Rwanda. I'm going to share with you a presentation on multi-stakeholder platforms for transforming commodity corridors and value chains. This presentation will flow as follows. First and foremost, we will be looking at the challenges that face smallholder farmers. Secondly, we will look at commodity corridors and the role of multi-stakeholder platforms in addressing the challenges. And thirdly, we're going to share a few examples on how the multi-stakeholder platforms are being used in the Africa region. Smallholder farmers face many challenges in the areas of technology, the input-output markets, access to credit or finance, and even resource management. They also face fragmented knowledge, whether it's from research, education, or extension. And this means that they are not able to reduce their transaction costs. It further means that they are not able to lift themselves out of poverty. They also face institutional constraints. What we note from many of these challenges is that they cannot be addressed one by one. there is need for an approach that simultaneously looks at these challenges and provides some of the solutions that can help these smallholder farmers reduce their costs of farming and even production, and even being able to trade in these commodities. From the previous slide, we've seen the role markets and knowledge can play in order to lift farmers out of poverty. An example here, we see a combination between markets and knowledge playing a very significant role in uplifting the production and productivity of smallholder farmers. That gives evidence that there is need to address many of these issues that affect these farmers simultaneously. Smallholder farmers face many gaps in their production activities. For example, the varieties that they are able to access may not be the varieties that are demanded in the market. The seeds that they are able to access may not be the right quality or even of varieties that are needed to produce for themselves and the market. And even the grain that they end up producing may not be what the market demands. Earlier, we mentioned about addressing challenges that face farmers simultaneously rather than one by one. One of the models that can be used in this case is the commodity corridor approach, which divides the commodity chain into production hubs, distribution hubs, and consumption hubs in such a way that one is able to see what is needed to move a commodity from production to consumption, of course using the consumption hubs as the driver of these commodities. We can break up the commodity corridor into different components for even much better clarity. At the bottom is the market, the signals that are needed from the market to the different components of this commodity corridor, as well as to the different actors. As we move up, we see the products that are needed by the market, but further up, we see the actors that play a role in ensuring that these commodities are actually produced and that actually are moved to the markets or to the consumers where they're supposed to be used. So where does the multi-stakeholder platform then come in? As we can see the second row from up, we have actors or partners. These actors or partners are necessary in order to move this commodity from one end to the other. And the collection of these different actors is what constitutes the multi-stakeholder platform, as we are going to see briefly. So a multi-stakeholder platform comprises of different stakeholders that have an interest in a particular commodity. In this example here, we see the seed supplies, the farmers who produce, research, development and extension, the traders, the processors and consumers. All these have an interest to efficiently ensure the product is moving from one end to the other. Therefore, key members of a multi-stakeholder platform. We can visualize the multi-stakeholder platform as simply the actors, as we saw earlier, that cut across the three hubs. And some of these, of course, as we see in the lower part, we have examples of these kind of actors. In this sense, the multi-stakeholder platform is also acting as a business platform. We can visualize the multi-stakeholder platform diagrammatically in this sense, where the lead partner, or using this model, this is the lead farm approach, where the lead partner or off-taker is able to link to the smallholder farmers or producers, and the other partners come in significantly to support them, whether by providing the extension service, input, they're providing other technologies and information, or even business support services, but also development organizations, government, research, and development institutions also giving the required support. So in this case, then a multi-stakeholder platform will have this kind of partnerships contained or built into it. So I think we've already mentioned about the essence of multi-stakeholder platform. What does this platform usually do? Different components, whether it's forecasting consumer or processor demands, coordinating varieties, and even promoting the seed systems, providing quality standards and control, or facilitating contracting and other agreements. These are just examples of what a multi-stakeholder platform can do. So to effectively be a member of a multi-stakeholder platform, there has to be some benefits that one anticipates or expects. For example, breeders expect direct linkages with consumers. Seed systems, they would like to see this to be more demand-driven. Farmers are able to self-organize and reduce risks using these kind of platforms. And traders are able to get more and high quality grain, and consumers are assured of high quality and lower prices. So these are some of the potential benefits of a multi-stakeholder platform. So a multi-stakeholder platform affects systems. So, and in this example that we have here, we can expect changes to take place at the individual level, whether it's about skills, facilitation. It can also be at institutional level. It can have MOUs, organization changes. It can be at what we convert as networking or inter-institutional. That is identifying more acceptable solutions that affect many different actors or components of commodity, or even products and public goods. So faster product and enterprise development, faster decisions, among others. So multi-stakeholder platform can affect systems, and this is what can be shown here. Now, going into some of the examples where the multi-stakeholder platforms have been used, in this first case of Tanzania, so we see different roles played by different actors, and basically the off-takers are very key, and of course the farmers that need to provide goods or produce to these off-takers. These are very key members of a multi-stakeholder platform. So we see different examples for Tanzania in different places, all of them driven by the volume of specific varieties that are needed. And this has been via these kind of multi-stakeholder platforms. Another example for this case is the Rwanda case, where a number of actors ranging from the off-taker, for example, the aggregator trust, being able to link to the seed supplier that is increasing the demand for specific varieties they need, and this being able to go to the farmers. So the farmers that are contracted by aggregator trust are supplied by I&J, for example, the seed company here, to ensure that they produce the right type of varieties that are demanded by the off-taker in this case. And the extension, the advisories, the agronomy, these are provided by the research teams. And of course, the other service providers such as banks who provide finance, among others. Another example for the use of the multi-stakeholder platforms is in Malawi, where they were used to test whether the MSPs could increase investments in certified seed, and whether the MSPs could also increase the use of certified seed by farmers, and whether the MSPs could accelerate uptake of new market-demanded varieties. So the three hypotheses were tested, and the results proved positive that MSPs, especially when integrated into the private sector, or when led by the private sector, could increase these three aspects of seed. In our final case, the Nepal lentil sector was facing many challenges, but most significantly, the volumes that were locally produced were declining while the imports were increasing. Different stakeholders came together, supported by the USAID Feed the Future program, and explored ways in which the trend could be reversed. A multi-stakeholder platform approach was proposed and introduced, and different actors, especially the private sector, came on and started linking with the producers, and they began exploring how the trends could be reversed and how they could start sourcing locally. This work was supported by the Feed the Future program of the USAID through the Innovation Lab for Legume Systems Research. We are grateful for this work and acknowledge this support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Eliud, for that stimulating presentations. Let's keep questions coming for Eliud on the chat section, and we'll be able to respond to that after the next presentation. The next presentation, we'll hear from Dr. Joseph Wesing on product lifecycle and I2I platform. Joe is an independent consulting science advisor, educator, and project manager who works with a wide range of regulatory, public, and private sector scientists and policymakers to develop farming solutions for low-resource farmers at the global level. He has worked at USAID in the private sector and was also the director of the Science Project Management and Leadership Program at Webster University. He currently now supports projects with the Legume Systems Innovation Lab, headquartered at the Michigan State University. Please welcome Joseph.
Hello, everybody. My name is Joe Husing, and I'm going to talk to you for the next 10 minutes or so about the product lifecycle framework and the I2I platform. What is a product life cycle? A product life cycle is the time frame from the product profile. This is sometimes called a TPP, but it's just your product concept or description of your idea, to product introduction, scaling, and until the product is removed or replaced from the market. Importantly, any product, it doesn't matter if it's a plant variety, a device, a tool, a policy, whatever, can be managed using a PLC framework. The PLC is broken down into stages. The PLC is used to stage where a product or project is or will be in time. And this is very similar to a stage gate process that many of you are familiar with. The stages are important because they allow easy planning, tracking, and discussion of product development. Why is AID using a PLC approach to projects? Well, the reason is USAID has spent billions of dollars in investments, and few innovations that we all work so hard on are actually scaled and adopted by target groups. And they would like to change that. They would like to have a goal to significantly increase the number and scale of innovations that reach stakeholders. The PLC was picked because it's widely used by the private sector to design and manage projects and has a long history of success. USAID will use the I2I innovation to impact platform at the University of Illinois for tracking the PLC of projects. So remember, PLC as a framework and I2I as a platform. Why is there a PLC framework and an I2I platform? Well, I2I was developed first. It's actually still under development, but it's in use as a platform. And then the PLC framework was added later. They should align though in the end, and I'll show you how that works in just a moment. This figure shows the product lifecycle framework that USAID is using. And you'll notice that there are here 11 different stages. There's nothing magical about the number of stages. You may have less stages if you have less information or you want to have a more succinct presentation, and you may have more stages if you have situations where you have more detail. So I'm showing here 1 through 11 stages, and below that you can see are the outcomes that are to be achieved at each of those stages. So for example, at stage 1, product profile, where the target product profile, the TPP is developed, is based on market research and segmentation. And the multi-stakeholder platform that Ilya just showed you just a little while ago is very useful for helping to develop a profile. Once the profile is developed, the discovery stage, stage 2 then kicks in, where you identify all the different components that will go into that product. Some of these may have to be discovered. Some of the components may already be in existence. Stage 3, 4, and 5, proof of concept, validation, and selection, is largely associated with developing prototypes, trialing them, testing them, demonstrating, weeding out, finding the one product or two that you're actually going to move forward to commercial release. Many products at stage 6 have a requirement for some kind of regulatory approval. So for example, varietal release is an example of that. Foods may require some kind of food safety registration before they can move forward to stage 7, the commercial introduction stage. And this is where the forces are brought together, usually with the private sector that can incentivize and be involved in widespread adoption of the technology. Stage 8 is then what we would typically call scaling. That's the growth stage where your product starts to reach many, many people, many different stakeholders. But all products go through a point where they reach maturity and then start into decline. And then finally, in the private sector, are phased out. So what the product lifecycle framework does, it not only allows you to develop the roadmap for your product, but also to think about when you need to start on the next product, anticipating stage 9, 10, and 11. What I want to do now is show how the I2I stations will align to the PLC framework. So remember, it's a platform. I2I is a platform. PLC is a framework. And across the top here, I have in blue are the I2I stations, as they're called, within that learning platform. And then below the I2I stations, I have that same map that I just showed you in the figure earlier of the stage 1 through 11 of the PLC stages and their expected outcomes. I'm only showing stage 1 through 7 aligning here with I2I at the moment because that's where the platform is in development. But as you can see, the idea here is to have an alignment between the framework and the platform. And what the platform will do for you is help you think through what pieces you need to make this project successful and commercializable, and what pieces are missing, and ultimately help you write something like a business plan that will describe your particular product and how you envision it being developed, commercialized, and scaled. Okay, so in summary, we discussed and defined the product lifecycle and its role in project design and implementation. We also discussed why USAID is using a PLC approach and what it hopes to achieve. And we showed that the PLC is a framework for product design, development, and scaling. And finally, that the PLC framework will use the I2I platform to help develop and manage the project product development. Lastly, and I think this is very important, any product, it doesn't matter if it's a concept, it doesn't matter if it's some kind of policy that you're working on, a plant variety, or some kind of tool, all of those can be implemented within a PLC framework. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Joe, for that presentation. I'm not sure if there are any reflections on the chat based on the two presentations. I'm not sure, Eliud, whether I got you right. We have a measure on to assess the effectiveness of these multi-stakeholder platforms. Is there a consensus on the way of reporting the performance of these multi-stakeholder platforms? If you are joining this call, maybe. Eliud, are you in this call?
Sorry, Simon, Eliud is not available. He was unable to connect, so he asked me to entertain any questions on his behalf. So in answer to your question, during the last phase of the Legume Lab, we did two separate research projects on multi-stakeholder platforms. One involved researching the platforms themselves, in other words, looking at the benefits that accrued to those that participated in the platforms in various ways. We tracked, as Eliud had mentioned in his presentation, three things in particular. One, whether the multi-stakeholder platform increased the use of quality seed. Second, whether it increased the adoption of new varieties. And then finally, whether benefits accrued to the farmers and to other actors in the value chain if they participated in a multi-stakeholder platform. And in each instance, these were comparisons of existing platforms that were studied versus areas that had no platform. And we did comparisons across the factual and the counterfactual to see what the results would be. And as you might assume, those that participated in the multi-stakeholder platforms had many distinct advantages, especially around production and trade. Most importantly, farmers had off-takers ready to take their grain at the end of the season. And these same off-takers were also the ones who were sponsoring the purchase of seed and farmer education to ensure that their yields were highest and that the quality of the grain was sufficient for them to be able to trade the grain on international markets. So the benefits from the multi-stakeholder platforms that came out of those research studies were very clear. And for that reason, we've implemented it as part of our call for proposals. When the call for proposals come out, you'll be asked to identify a multi-stakeholder platform in which you could participate, or in case there is not one, we'll ask you to identify how you might possibly go about putting together a multi-stakeholder platform for your proposed technology or process, whatever the case may be. So I hope that answers your question, Simon. If there are other questions, please let me know.
Yeah, it does. Thank you for that robust response. In case there are other questions arising on these two presentations, then we'll be on to respond in real time. Well, at this juncture, we move on to the next, to the third TLT presentation. We will listen from Dr. Timothy Silberg. Timmy is a socio-ecological researcher with over decades of experience in international agricultural development. He serves as the Resilience and Climate Change Lead for Legume Systems Innovation Lab at Michigan State University. Please welcome Timmy and tell us something on climate change.
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you for joining this presentation. It's a pleasure to have scientists, researchers, and practitioners from all across the globe to attend and support Legume Systems innovation and research. Once again, my name is Timothy Silberg. Today, we'll explore the intricate tapestry of legume systems, from the breeding labs that develop climate-resilient varieties to the farmers and cropping systems that cultivate them. I will present the vulnerabilities that climate change has exacerbated and discuss how we can enhance our responsiveness to these growing threats. As we proceed, I will illuminate some trends and highlight the development based on interactions between the legume value chain and climate change, identifying potential leverage points for systems-wide impact. So my goal for you today is not just to understand the current state of legume systems across several countries we'll talk about, but to indicate possible opportunities to conduct research, develop innovations, and apply those innovations to these leverage points. Just to give you an overview, the topics we'll cover today include an introduction that sets the stage for the discussion on the impact of climate change in Burundi, the Democratic Republic of Congo, Rwanda, and Tanzania. The background section is dedicated to defining legume systems and their functionality, as well as examining the vulnerability of these systems in contrast to their responsiveness to climate change. This foundational knowledge is crucial for understanding the subsequent parts of the presentation, which delve into the systematic analysis needed to identify specific vulnerabilities within different segments and countries. The results section highlights a brief overview of the climate smart varieties each country has developed in recent years and the vulnerabilities of those systems to deliver and cultivate them. Finally, in the discussion section, I will call upon you and the wider legume community to investigate gaps in my findings, as well as possible areas to innovate solutions. Before I jump into the presentation, I'd like you to respond to a poll. So here, on slide 4, I'll give you 15 seconds to respond. Which one of these statements pertain to climate change within the countries we'll talk about today do you believe is accurate? Is it A, the incidence of legume pests have increased steadily in Burundi across the past 5 years? Is B, future heat waves have shrunken the bean cultivation area of DR Congo by more than 10%? Is it C, Rwanda has been steadily receiving less rainfall every 10 years across the past 30 years? Or is D, all statements are correct? And let's see the results. If you answered D, you're correct. Here in this slide, we see issues that climate change has raised. But just so we have a shared definition for today, climate change is characterized by increasing temperatures, drying conditions, more frequent extreme weather events, all of which has led to changes in land and water resources, as well as alterations in agricultural production conditions for legumes. In the context of these challenges with legumes, it is evident that the several countries we're covering today in East Africa are facing significant hurdles in bean cultivation due to the impact of climate change. Burundi, for example, is experiencing increased dry periods that are leading to more frequent locust invasions in bean fields. In the DRC, the constraints seem similar. If you turn your attention to the figure here in the slide, more frequent and longer heat waves are making bean cultivation close near impossible. Rwanda has seen a decrease in rainfall over the past 30 years, and Tanzania is grappling with a shorter growing season, which is the most cited issue by farmers when cultivating them. These challenges underscore the urgent need for innovative and adaptive strategies to address the impact of climate change on legume production within these regions. Now, it's not all bad news. There have been several successes in research despite climatic events. In this slide, we find that several legume trade and breeding successes have been occurring. For example, the yellow bean has emerged as a significant player in the legume trade Tanzania covering 32% of the bean area or the area which is cultivable, indicating the importance in agricultural landscape. Additionally, the common bean plays a crucial role in providing food security to households in the northeast provinces of DRC, accounting for 50.7% of households. Furthermore, the successful development of new common bean breeds in Rwanda has demonstrated the ability to sustain yields in the face of increased temperatures, showcasing the potential for climate-resilient agriculture. So as I go through my presentation today, the one thing I want you to have in the back of your mind is an objective to systematically identify the vulnerabilities of specific segments in specific countries with the aim of leveraging success and addressing critical challenges in legume trade and breeding efforts. Okay, before we jump into the background section, I have another question for you. When you think of a legume system as a series of segments from the breeder to the off-taker, how many segments do you generally include? Is it A, 3, B, 4, C, 5, or D, more than 5? I'll wait 10 seconds for you to respond. I just want to gauge what the audience is thinking today, because there's a lot of debate in the literature about this number. And let's see the results. Okay, I'm going to present more than 5 here. So I have the definition of climate change on this slide as a reminder, even though we defined it earlier. Let's use it as a reference. Now, when we mention the extreme weather events and their negative effect on segments, we consider these vulnerable points. That is, the extent to which they are prone to or unable to adapt to impacts of climate change. Each segment can adapt or respond to climate change. Their responsiveness is considered as the functionality of a population of stakeholders. Since each segment is different, their functionality is measured differently. So here, as we move into slide 9, I want to explain the 7 segments we consider in the legume system. I've listed their definitions, just so we have a shared understanding of which operation I'm referring to for each segment. But let's get into how their functionality is described in the literature. First, breeding centers. Their functionality can be measured by the response time to develop specific varieties that respond to climatic events and market demand. Second, production and multiplication operations. Their performance can be measured by evaluating the availability and accessibility of different seed classes to meet market demand and respond to climatic events, as well as their cultivation and multiplication of several legume strands. In the third segment, quality control, functionality can be measured by evaluating the availability, capacity, and adherence to standards for high-quality, genetically pure seeds. In the fourth segment, distribution functionality can be measured by assessing the efficiency of intermediaries, such as wholesalers, in purchasing legume seeds in bulk from producers and distributing them to markets and farmers at a given speed. On the next slide, it begins with the 5th segment, marketing extension, which can be measured by assessing by what types of seed centers promote and what training has been provided to farmers on agricultural practices associated with the same seed. In the 6th segment, we finally come to the farmer and their cropping system. The functionality is typically measured by assessing the education of the farmer in terms of knowing which legume varieties and practices to cultivate according to different climatic conditions, and then evaluating the performance of their legume cropping system. And lastly, there's the grain market off-takers, which can be measured by assessing the capacity, quality, or quantity of legume yield purchased at the market based on socioeconomic and food security parameters. Okay, so now that we know the segments, we're going to explain the vulnerabilities, which are associated with heightened susceptibility to climate change. Past studies have identified several primary factors contributing to heightened vulnerability of legumes. These are indicated by the citations in this slide. These factors include a heavy reliance on crop production systems or varieties that are sensitive to climate change, which includes diminishing soil productivity, land degradation, and a declining natural resource base. Additionally, the weakening of local institutions and conventional social safety net systems, inadequate and diminishing capital resources, lack of timely access to inputs for crop production, and the markets that provide them, as well as high prevalence of sickness that affects labor, such as HIV, dengue, and others, including malaria, that exacerbate community labor force. This brings us to the next session of the presentation. Please respond to this poll on your screen. When you think of the intersection between legume system segments and their vulnerabilities, which climate-induced vulnerability are associated with breeding center segment? Is it soil fertility and local institution connectivity? Is it soil fertility and natural resource bases? Is it C, market/environment information access? Or it's D, option B and C? I'll wait 10 seconds for you to respond. And let's see the results. Well, the answer, as you'll see here, is D. In the first column, you'll see where breeding centers intersect with 3 vulnerabilities, which are marked with X's. According to the literature, the breeding part of the legume system is significantly affected by climate change across these 3 variables. Soil fertility and productivity play a crucial role in the breeding process, as the availability of fertile soil directly impacts the success of breeding centers. To develop specific legumes with traits that can withstand climate-related challenges such as drought and extended heat. Climate change can alter soil conditions at laboratory unless they have infrastructure to house the plants, affecting the productivity of the land and subsequently impacting breeding of resilient legume varieties. Additionally, the natural resource base, particularly that is regarding land, is a significant factor influencing the vulnerability of the breeding part of a legume system. Heavy rainfall, for example, can erode soils, reducing the land itself for availability of arable land for breeding activities, thus impacting the capacity to develop these varieties. Finally, information access is a critical variable that influences the vulnerability of breeding part of legume system to climate change. Access to information and knowledge about climate resilient breeding practice is essential for adapting them to changing climate conditions. And I don't want to explain each relationship because we don't have enough time. We won't have enough time to explain the results. But here we have a matrix, and this matrix was developed by combining 2 concepts: functionality of 7 components of a legume system and the 8 vulnerability factors of agricultural systems to weather extremes. And that's how we developed this matrix to measure legume system readiness to climate change. Each column represents 1 legume system segment, while each row represents a vulnerability factor. While each intersection between a column and a row arguably can demonstrate vulnerability of one section of a legume system, measurable interactions are illustrated or colored in black, and their measurable interactions are illustrated with those black boxes. We applied this matrix to each of the countries today to approximate how vulnerable each of their segments is to climate change. In this slide, I'll show you how we approximate through a ranking system of 3 levels. Rankings were applied based on a mix of qualitative and quantitative descriptions of legume system components and its interaction vulnerability found in the literature. The highest was colored green, which indicates adequate readiness. The second highest was colored yellow, which indicates moderately adequate. The lowest was colored red, which indicates inadequate. A black box indicates inability to rank because there's too much disagreement in the literature. For adequate, this ranking defines a legume system component and its intersecting vulnerability as being comprised of actors and their associated institutions that are able to meet all conditions for participating in the legume value chain. This includes factors such as access to basic infrastructure, services, comparable resources, social stability, asset endowments, interest, and power. Adequate readiness also implies that actors have the necessary resources, knowledge, and access to markets and inputs to effectively participate in the legume value chain. For moderately adequate, the ranking defines and signifies, once again, actors and their associated institutions which have made progress, but still require areas that need improvement to ensure that they can adapt to changing market demands, climate conditions. At this time, they face difficulties in fully overcoming constraints that are derived from the environment that they live in. For inadequate, this ranking defines a legume system component and its intersecting vulnerabilities being comprised with, once again, actors and their associated institutions that are unable to meet some or a significant portion of the conditions to participate in the value chain. It signifies that they cannot access the necessary resources, knowledge, and market inputs to adapt to a changing environment. Now, I like to describe the desk report that I conducted, but we won't have enough time to describe the findings. So if there are questions pertaining to this or the publications like Surge or the reports or white papers, we can respond to those questions later. Before we jump into the results, I'd like us to begin with a poll. What was the most inadequately prepared segment that you believe across the 4 countries, given the vulnerability to climate change? Was it their breeding centers, distributors, off-takers, or none of the above? I'll give you 10 seconds to respond. And let's see the results. Now, you're not going to see the response until the next slide, but I'll get into that once we start presenting each of the segments. Before we begin, when speaking about vulnerabilities, we need to establish a baseline of the performance to assess how legume seeds have been developed and delivered. So first, beginning with Burundi, we see that there are 3 active breeders that have come out with 6 climate-smart varieties, that is beans, in the past several years. As 2020, there were 65 multipliers to produce that seed. The varieties of the most popular beans were cultivated were approximately 9 years old. Moving on to DRC, there were 4 active legume breeders that came out with 5 climate-smart bean varieties, but that's of 2016. That's the most recent literature we have. 1 year after, there were 25 multipliers to produce that seed. So the varieties most popularly cultivated were 22 years old, which is a big jump from what we see in Burundi. Then when we move on to Rwanda, as of 3 years ago, there were 4 active bean breeders that released 6 climate-smart varieties. As of 2021, there were 31 seed producers to multiply them. So like Burundi, the average age of popular bean varieties being cultivated were 9 years old. And here in Tanzania, there were just 2 active legume breeders, but none had come out with climate-smart varieties, at least as of 2020. For quite a large country, the population of multipliers is quite small. And like DRC, the average age of the popular bean variety that was being cultivated hovers around approximately 20 years. Turning now into the results of the matrix, please focus your attention on the columns which are colored in red. These are the bottlenecks in the legume system, that is, distributors and market vendors. They sit directly between the producers of the seed and the consumers of the seed. This is particularly interesting because no matter how optimal a breeding center is or a multiplier, if the distributor cannot get the seed to the capable farmer, the overarching legume system remains less than optimal in a changing environment. You'll notice either all or almost all the vulnerability components or segments were ranked as inadequately prepared for extreme weather events. That's why you're seeing a bunch of red boxes underneath these 2 segments. So as discussed in the previous slide, the vulnerable segments, but one interesting factor behind Burundi's legume seed supply chain that limits its production is the dominance of the informal sector in the bean seed system. The informal sector, which serves the needs of most smallholders, accounts for a significant portion of the bean seed used every season in Burundi. This sector supplies seed through the use of own saved seed and farmer-to-farmer seed exchange, either through barter, cash, or gifts. Additionally, the lack of licenses and seed companies to disseminate public varieties has as hastened the role of informal seed sector. And furthermore, the formal bean seed system in Burundi is centralized with a vertical or unidirectional flow of different seed classes and is still under government control to a considerable extent. These factors contribute to the limitations of the production and distribution of legume seeds across Burundi. Now we come to DRC. We see an alarming picture about the country's legume system and its readiness to climate change. As you can see, all but one segment is classified as inadequate. It is encouraging to see, despite all of these factors, that farmers are still able to respond to climate change accordingly. And when we look at the next slide, one thing we should pay attention to is what exactly is driving these vulnerabilities, or rather, what multiple things are driving these inadequacies in the legume system. I don't have all the time to list them, but one should note that the supply chain has consistently had a limited production given the disparities in income from bead traders between men and women. One study found that female market vendors were more likely to earn lower incomes than male traders, with 35% of them earning less than $25 US a month compared to the 13% of male traders. Now, I may seem that I'm getting into specifics, but when only 9% of women are earning such a low income, while 45% of male traders are earning more than that figure, this gender-based income disparity has a tremendous impact on the overall productivity and competitiveness of legume seed supply chains across the country, which is then exacerbated by climate change. Here in slide 25, we show you another ranking metrics for Rwanda's legume system. Now in Burundi and DRC, the bottlenecks seem to be concentrated in one area. That is, those segments seem to be linked together with two red boxes at the top of the matrix sitting together. Interestingly, it appears that two separate entities here are present in Rwanda. One at the beginning of the legume system, that is the legume breeding centers, and two segments at the end of the legume system, that is the extension agent and the farmer. All of them are driving by a lacking natural resource base, land cover, lack of land for households, which makes sense given how small the country is and how densely it is populated. In this slide, it offers a better summary of the matrix, but more so the factors behind its vulnerabilities in Rwanda. As Robertson explains, the Rwandan legume seed supply chain has limited production due to a lack of modern post-harvest infrastructure, known as PHI. These include drying and storage facilities. According to the study, only 59% of farmers had access to drying facilities and 71% had access to storage facilities, which may seem like a high percentage, but when a large majority of the country cultivates beans, this is quite strange. There's a lack of modern infrastructure, which contributes to high post-harvest losses and limits the production of legume seeds as a whole. Now we come to our final country, Tanzania. Much like Rwanda, there's no concentration of bottlenecks necessarily. They are spread across the entire legume system, from the one that develops seed to the one that distributes it, and finally to the one that cultivates it. All but one segment appear to have issues with access. As you see here, breeding centers don't necessarily link with that intersection, but production and multiplication do. Distribution does as well. And then finally, we look at farm and cropping systems, which does intersect, but is ranked as moderately adequate. But once again, if we were to bet all of our money on the largest impact or investment in a particular vulnerability that would echo across these four segments, this is the one vulnerability that would make a difference. In this slide, we're presented with some key insights about the factors behind the vulnerabilities. An interesting factor behind the Tanzanian legume seed supply chain that limits its production is the lack of supportive or sustained seed suppliers to the producers. This is due to the challenge in the supply of early generation seeds, which constrains production. For example, the Raphael Group, which is a lead firm in sugar bean corridor in Tanzania, has demand for more than 10,000 metric tons of sugar beans, but is only able to obtain about 4,000 tons due to this limitation in seed supply. This highlights the critical role of seed supplies in the legume seed supply chain and the need for improvement in this area to enhance production. So as we've seen, the complexities of legume systems in Eastern Africa are perforated by several vulnerabilities. But in knowing them, we can be strategic about our research-informed innovations in the future. For example, in Burundi, there is a need to study the issues that breeders and farmers face in accessing market and environmental information, and what scenarios may play out across time and space throughout the legume system if they're granted this access. In the DR Congo, research efforts should be directed towards looking for strategies to strengthen the immediate segments closest to farmers, such as extension agent institutions and off-takers, to improve the standing of farmers and their performance within the legume system. Rwanda can benefit from reviving its natural resource base to enhance the performance of breeding centers, that is, land management, land cover. These services delivered by extension agents and production among farmers can be enhanced as well. But again, those need to be studied. Lastly, in Tanzania, there's a need to grant access to inputs and markets to assist multipliers and distributors of legume seed, thereby improving the overall efficiency and effectiveness of the legume supply chain. These areas of focus present promising opportunities for driving research-informed innovations and improvement within the entire legume supply chain across Eastern Africa. So that's it. I'd like to mention that it was a pleasure to be part of the wider team that is investigating and increasing the resilience of legume systems amidst the pressing challenges posed by climate change, particularly in Eastern Africa. So I appreciate your attention and feedback today.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Timmy, for that very interesting presentation. I think there is one question on the Q&A that maybe it would be of interest to you to respond to. Are you on this call, Timmy?
Yeah, yes,
Okay.
I'm trying to find the. Oh, yes, thank you, for this question. Please, what are the characteristics of the 6 climate-smart released bean varieties you presented in the slides? Oh, I can get this information to you. I'm not sure if you can go off mic. Are you referring to the 6 climate-smart varieties that were released, if my memory serves me correctly, in Rwanda?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Yes. Okay. Thanks. So there, I can get the. There's 3 types, as you're probably well aware of. There's ones that are resilient to drought, one that's resilient to heavy rainfall, and early maturing. There's 3 that are early maturing, and then 3 that are resilient to drought. I don't have the names at my fingertips, but those are the characteristics. And Now that I have your name, I can send you the information, the publications regarding that material. But thank you for that question.
Thank you. I think those that was the only reflection from your presentation that I'm able to observe at now. But we can keep the questions coming and post them on the chat for Timmy to respond to that. So we still had more time, but we will now take a short break for around slightly above 15 minutes. We'll come back at 2:40 p.m. Central Africa time for the rest of the program. So we meet at 2:40 p.m. Central Africa time. So welcome back again to the final session of the convening today, where we'll begin with the final TLT presentation, followed by another opportunity to engage with the topics presented this afternoon in the breakout sessions. So kindly continue sharing your experiences with the legume value chain within the region, particularly the bottlenecks and gaps in whatever segment that you are engaged in. If you have joined us this afternoon, you can post a brief introduction of yourself and affiliation, and we highly appreciate your participation in this convening. It is my pleasure now at this time to invite Dr. Veronique Derio, I hope I pronounced that right, who will present on value chain and systems integration. Dr. Veronique is a professor at Michigan State University, and her research portfolio includes conceptual and empirical studies along agricultural value chains from input provision to farming, processing, trading, and consumption. Veronique serves as the value chains and systems integration lead for the Legume Systems Innovation Lab. Please welcome Veronique.
Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. I am Veronique Thériault, and it is a pleasure to be here today at the East Africa Regional Stakeholder Meeting. The objective of this presentation is twofold. First, to refresh our knowledge on the topic of agri-food system and more specifically on value chain. Second, to apply those key concepts to legume value chain and system in order to identify efficiency and effectiveness gap in the current legume production system and possible ways to address those gaps. Here is the outline of the presentation. Let's start by familiarizing ourselves with the concept of agri-food systems. As defined by the High Level of Panel expert in 2017, agri-food systems include all the elements such as the environment, people, inputs, processes, infrastructure, institutions, as well as the activities that relate to the production, processing, distribution, preparation, and consumption of food, and the outputs of these activities, including socioeconomic and environmental outcomes. In other words, agri-food systems are composed of food supply chain, food environments, and consumer behavior. And these three elements are affected and affect each other. The food environment refers to the physical, economic, political, and socio-cultural context in which consumer engages with the food system. Agri-food systems highlight the crucial role that agricultural and food value chain and food environment play in influencing consumer food choices. As you can see, agri-food systems are circular and not linear to represent their complexity and interconnectedness across agricultural and food production and consumption. Agri-food systems are dynamic. They change over time and also vary from place to place. For this presentation, we will focus on the value chain element of the agri-food system while keeping in mind that value chain are part of the broader and complex agri-food systems. As described by Campbell in 2010, a value chain refers to the full range of activities and services required to bring a product or service from its conception to sale in its final markets, whether local, national, regional, or international. It includes activities such as production, storage, distribution, processing, packaging, retailing, and consumption. It is important to highlight that decisions made in one segment of the value chain have implications for the other ones. Decisions at the production level not only influence what and how much is produced, but also what and how much is consumed. An analysis of the value chain helps to better understand the interconnection among the various actors and activities, and to understand what will likely happen to the production and consumption if there was a change along the value chain. It can inform on the type of decision and interventions that are needed to improve the performance of the value chain by identifying viable and profitable market opportunities and solutions to bottleneck. Performance can take different forms. It can be in terms of economic, social, and environmental sustainability. For instance, it can be measured in terms of efficiency, productivity, profitability, competitiveness, inclusiveness, and resilience. In the next few slides, we will go over the concept of structure and dynamic within a value chain. The material presented draw on a previous paper on inclusiveness in agricultural value chain that I co-authored with Stephen Higley, John Statz, Nengo Dembele, and Boubacar Diallo. A value chain includes all the actors involved in input supply, production, processing, marketing, and consumption. These value chain actors operate within an environment that can either enable or disable their performance. Value chains are composed of several competing vertical supply channels that link farmers to processor, wholesaler, retailer, and to the final buyer at the local, national, regional, or international level. These actors operate in an environment that can either facilitate or hinder their performance. Laws, regulation, policy, international trade agreement, think about the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, are all part of the policy landscape that affects the movement of food products along a value chain. Likewise, research and development, extension services, finance, and transport are part of the business landscape that can facilitate or hinder the flow of food products along the value chain and therefore the value chain performance. Coordination is also present within a value chain. Horizontal coordination can take place among actors that perform a similar function, such as farming. For instance, farmers can coordinate by forming farmer association, which can help them to reduce their transaction costs by assembling and selling larger volumes and receiving higher prices through improved bargaining power. Vertical coordination refers to the type of interaction, or if you prefer, transaction, that input suppliers have with their output buyers within a specific supply channel. For instance, it describes the type of interaction that processors have with their input supplier, in this case farmer, and their output buyers, in this case wholesalers. Actors performing different functions interact with each other through vertical integration, spot market, or contract. Vertical integration refers to an interaction where one enterprise is engaged in several activities, such as production, processing, and marketing. Under vertical integration, these activities are done in-house. Interaction can also be done via spot markets. For instance, processors buy from farmers and sell to wholesalers on the spot at current market price. Where there's a large number of buyers competing for the product, sellers can receive higher prices, whereas when competition among buyers is low, sellers have a more difficult time negotiating higher prices. The third type of interaction is contract. The contract stipulates the grades, standards, quantity, and delivery condition of the products between buyer and sellers. The presence and type of horizontal and vertical coordination that exists within a value chain influences its governance. How a value chain is governed affects the distribution of benefit, information, and power among the value chain actors. Value chain mapping is a very useful tool used to illustrate the structure of a value chain at a given point in time. It depicts the key value chain actors and their relation, as well as the flow of products, services, and information. These maps can convey a lot of information, so let's take a look at how to read and understand them. The horizontal level represent the value chain activities, such as farming, processing, and marketing. The different ways that a product moves from farming to consumption represent the various competing supply channels. In this example, there are 4 competing supply channels and a 5th potential supply channel. Vertical integration characterizes the 5th potential one, since all activities from farming to wholesaling will be done by the proposed new farm co-op. The importance of a supply channel can also be represented by its size. For instance, the larger size of supply channel number 1 indicates that subsistence production remains highly prevalent. Available data in regard to the number of farmers, processors, traders, volumes, sale value, and participation of young and women for each activity and supply channel can be overlaid on the map to provide a fuller picture. Adding this information can help to identify where women and young people are more or less involved along the value chain. A value chain map provides a picture of the value chain at a given point in time. But keep in mind that value chains are dynamic, and therefore this mapping exercise has to be redone over time to capture any changes in the value chain. Value chains are affected by changes in demand and supply. Population growth, rapid urbanization, and growing per capita income are all contributing to greater demand for processed and convenience food, as well as a greater demand for diversified, nutritious, and higher quality food products. These changes provide market opportunity for actors all along the value chain, from farmer to retailers. Changes in supply, such as the adoption of new technology, can reduce costs, increase the availability and affordability of existing products, lead to the development of new products, and therefore to higher revenues and profit for value chain actors. Changes in the environment can also influence the value chain performance. Improvement in infrastructure can contribute to reducing costs and minimizing food losses during transport. Policies can affect incentive to produce and consume more or less diversified, nutritious, and safe food. For instance, input subsidy program targeting specific crop can create incentive for farmers to grow those targeted crops, often at the detriment of other untargeted crops. Value chains are dynamic and they can transform over time. Value chain have been classified as traditional, transitional, or modern by Barrett and his co-author in 2022. On the continent, transitional agri-food value chain are the most prevalent. They are characterized by a vibrant processing and retailing sector composed of several small and medium enterprises. The food service is also vibrant through food street vendor and independent restaurant, which can provide market opportunities for time-constrained urban consumer. Changes in the structure and dynamic of a value chain can positively or negatively affect its economic, social, and environmental performance. Intervention can be designed and implemented to improve value chain performance. A wide range of potential intervention to prevent or address value chain bottlenecks and expand market opportunities exist. According to Hagblatt and his co-authors, intervention are more likely to succeed in further developing sustainable and inclusive value chain if interventions stimulate sustainable, viable private businesses. If intervention affect large number of people at once through policy, training program, financial institution, business association, or co-op. And if intervention have strong links with key private sector participants. Now that we're all more familiar with key concepts, we will apply them to the legume value chain in East Africa with the aim of identifying opportunities to improve legume products and processes while increasing efficiency and effectiveness in the system. In a value chain analysis, end markets are often the starting point. End market refers to the final transaction in the value chain. It suggests that intervention should be demand-driven instead of supply-driven. To do so, we first identified end market opportunities that currently exist or could exist in the near future, locally, nationally, regionally, or internationally for legume products. What are the main factors driving demand for legume products in terms of prices, quantity, quality, and buyer taste and preferences? We need to understand who buys what, where, and when, and how they prepare and consume it, as well as what opportunities exist to sell more or sell at greater value. For instance, we need to understand if demand is being unmet because of limited availability, poor quality, or because prices are too high compared to competing alternative products. Once the existing and potential market opportunities are understood, the next step is to identify the main bottlenecks along the value chain and solution to address them in order to seize those market opportunities and improve the value chain performance. Here is a non-exhaustive list of constraints along the value chain that have been identified in the literature. In terms of research and development, limited availability of certified seed and delays in releasing new variety have been identified as constraints. At the production level, low farm productivity due to low adoption of improved seed in some countries and for some bean types has been identified as a key constraint. Pests and disease, along with low soil fertility, also contribute to low level of production. Inadequate storage lead to lower quality, lower price, and losses. In some countries, there is limited value added as most bean products are sold as grain. There is inadequate access to equipment to improve the processing and quality of the legume grain. Access to market remain a constraint for some farmers. In the market, legume products, including grain, pods, and leaves, as well as legume-based products that meet consumer tastes and preferences are not always available. Lack of adequate infrastructure, such as road, market, and electricity, affect the performance of different actors along the value chain. Input subsidy program targeting starchy staples can create incentive to allocate more land to starchy staples, often at the detriment of other crops such as legume. Limited access to support services, such as credit and extension services, have been identified as constraints. Lack of access to data and little communication among and across value chain actors are also constraining the performance of the legume value chain. Several potential strategic interventions to address those constraints have also been identified in the literature. Among those potential interventions are the development and timely release of new varieties that are well adapted to the needs of farmers and taste and preferences of consumers. Higher rate of adoption of improved seed can boost productivity, while mechanization can reduce labor bottleneck and increase productivity. In addition to these on-farm improvements, the use of improved crop storage bags can contribute to improving the quality of legume grain and reduce losses. The development and promotion of new legume products such as flour, powder, and canned and pre-cooked beans products can respond to the need of consumers for easy to prepare, ready to eat, nutritious food products, especially in urban areas. The use of the bean corridor approach can facilitate the movement of beans from production zone to consumption zone by eliminating production bottleneck. Improved access to infrastructure such as reliable electricity will be beneficial to small and medium processing enterprises, notably by reducing their operation costs. Awareness campaign has been identified as a potential intervention to increase demand by educating consumers on the health benefit of consuming legumes. The creation of a multi-stakeholder platform, as it exists in some countries, can play an important role in facilitating communication among and across value chain actors. And finally, strengthening the capacity of market information system and of digital tool has been proposed as a strategy to collect information about quantity, quality, and prices of legume products and to ensure that this information is widely accessible to all value chain actors. This concludes my presentation on legume value chain and system. And here I would like to share with you some of the references used for this presentation. And a few more references. Thank you, and I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you on what are current and potential market opportunities and what needs to be done to address efficiency and effectiveness gap in the current legume production system.
Thank you very much, Veronique, for that stimulating presentation on value chains. Do we have any reflections from the
I see one
from the
question in the
Q&A?
Q&A. Yeah, but I'm not sure that I'm in the best position to answer this question. So there might be someone else on this. in the Zoom call that might be able to answer that question.
Okay. Great. Can the, maybe I have a reflection, can the existing structure of the value chains, for example, the production system, fragmented market, and how the prevailing institutional constraints are addressed, constrain gains from horizontal and vertical coordination of value chains? All which is affecting the other? How?
Can you just repeat the question? So
my question
if
is
coordination
yeah, my question is that the existing structures of the value chain, like the production system, how the institutional constraints are addressed, things like fragmented markets, can they constrain the gains from horizontal coordination or vertical coordination of the value chains? Or
Thank you.
which one is the solution of the, yeah, okay.
No, good question. So the different type of coordination that exists, and they're all different across the different supply channel. So there's more than one supply channel. So you can see that you might have individual farmer selling to the market, so that, and then you can have next to them farmers association that are also selling to the market. So then farmer will be organized through horizontal coordination, and it's probably to address a need that as an individual farmer, it's often challenging to have the quantity, great volume, and to be able to bargain or negotiate better prices when you're on your own. So then that create incentive for farmer to organize and become organized through association or co-op, where they can more easily aggregate larger volume that become more interesting to the buyer. And then they're in a better position to negotiate prices. So all those different supply channel exist. Some of them might be vertically integrated, where those farmer association co-op can engage in processing and wholesaling and retailing. So often it's true, it can go both ways, that the type of coordination might impact the performance, and in response to the performance, people might decide to engage or to coordinate in different ways. So hopefully I answer your question.
Yes, thank you very much, Veronique, and I'm sure you're on standby to address any questions that are related to your presentations in case they emerge on the chat. Thank you very much for now.
Thank you.
We still have, yeah, thank you. We still had some little time, but we will donate it to the next session, where we will now again break out into smaller groups to continue the discussions on the topics that have been presented this afternoon. So we will all return to the main meeting room after around 45 minutes or more to hear the feedbacks from each of the groups. So like we did in the morning, you'll be automatically assigned to a breakout room. Thank you. Welcome back to the plenary. I hope everyone is back here. Right. So this is now an opportunity to hear the feedbacks from different rooms through their rapporteurs. I will call on the rapporteur for breakout room 1 to provide a summary for within like 5 minutes. Please, rapporteur for group number 1, you can step in.
Yes, thanks. Yes, thank you. This is Symphorien. In our breakout room, we had very good discussion in the different sessions. So on the question 1, we had some from stakeholders that production and the seed multiplication have a main trait, and the breeding process are not enough accurate to provide quality varieties and seeds seed and quality varieties for multiplication, operation, and there is a lack of access to a market. And in the breeding programs, there is a lack of equipment. So we don't have access to develop infrastructure and also access to improve farmers. We don't have access to improve agronomic practices for better production of legumes in East Africa. And they don't have access to capital to purchase the improved technologies like seeds, threshing machine, processing machine, other things. And they say that it could be good to train farmers on the use of improved technologies for them to be in position to purchase threshing machine, planting material. On the productivity, we had some discussion, and the stakeholders said that it is good to create access to the extension service in the legume production system in East Africa. And on the seed multiplication operation, the seed producers were limited in resource. They don't have access to financial resource and technical resource. And there is a high demand for legume in East Africa, but the supply is very low. The volume of legume grain produce is not sufficient to cover the high demands on the market. So increasing the production of legume is the solution through the adoption of improved agronomic practices and the access to the capital. They raised some research questions on how to improve the production in farmers' conditions and farmer settings. It is, they said that it's also good to have some knowledge on mechanization of legume production system from planting to harvesting. On the multi-stakeholders platform, there are some platforms in East Africa. We have some research institutions like Tanzania Research Institution on Legumes. We have intensive research on legumes. We have CIAT, we have ITA that create discussion between different stakeholders in East Africa, but they work individually. They don't have a good coordination between their intervention in the stakeholders system. And most of those institutions, they create discussion about how to improve legume production, processing, and marketing in East Africa. But the only one issue is that they work individually. There is a lack of coordination. In Tanzania, for example, farmers organize themselves in association to sell their products. They have a big buyers, I mean legume seed buyers called, for example, Town Trades, which is a government organization for exporting legumes products. And farmers were on their own in East Africa in the markets. They don't have access to better information on the seed price, and they just sell the seeds based on what buyers they brought farmers get. And in addition, they don't have access directly to the big buyers. Most of the times, government intervene to buy the products. So those are the points we discussed in our group 1. Thank you.
Thank you, Symphorian. That is quite detailed. We can listen to rapporteur for number 2, group number 2, please.
Yes, thank you, Simon. I will be reporting for Fora Obebo's group. Once again, Fora led a very interesting discussion in our group, and we had many interesting insights. First of all, climate change is probably the biggest threat to the region currently because of the changing climate and varieties that are not well adapted to the changing climate yields are generally down for legumes across all of the systems. Commercialization is a huge need for legume systems. It is not always seen as a commercial crop. There are other cash crops that take precedence in the production systems. And so beans currently do not have the same structure and do not have the same efficiencies that other cropping systems do. This will also have to change if legume production systems are to become efficient. Currently, there are not enough off-takers for grain, but this is due to a big disconnect between seed producers, farmers, and off-takers, especially processors. Seed producers are producing the seed that they think is important for the system. Farmers are buying the seed that are producing. There's a lot of saved seed in the system, but all of this means that often the grain production does not meet the needs of the processors, and processors are having trouble resourcing the grain that they need in order to meet the market demand. Many of the processors complain that they cannot get sufficient grain in order to meet the demand. Because legumes are an open pollinated crop, farmers can save seed. They often do. And although this may seem like the best value proposition to farmers, they really have not heard and do not understand the advantages of using quality seed and the advantages of the increased yields that come from using quality seed. Although keeping beans as a family crop rather than a commercial crop reduces risk, it doesn't lift farmers out of subsistence farming, and so it becomes a vicious cycle. Biofortified beans are available, but they're not widely accepted. Processors are using the traditional red varieties instead, but there are biofortified beans available, and they should be grown, and these would definitely be valuable for nutrition. However, the case is not being made to the consumer, and therefore this lack of information on the part of the consumer means that those biofortified beans are not reaching the levels of demand that they could or should. Extension systems are mostly by the government, but there is a serious shortage of agents due to government cutbacks. There's a need to rely on train the trainer programs, and there has to be an increase in demonstration plots, but also the use of e-extension materials would be able to fill some of that gap if they were used strategically. Unfortunately, currently, there's a shortage of devices. Many farmers do not have access to smartphones, but the extension systems are not currently strategically approaching this because there usually are enough devices available. It's just that they're not being used strategically in order to reach as many people as possible. And so there is a possibility of switching to digital and e-extension systems. However, there has to be more intentionality about it. It's not just about throwing digital material out there. It's about training the system itself, the extension system itself, to use digital materials in the most effective way. There has to be a strategy behind it. There also is a great need to focus on agronomic practices, good agricultural practices. Yields have to be increased if legumes are going to reach their potential in the region. And this means doing some value added as well. So it's increasing yields, but it's also doing value added. This can be done at the farm level. It increases the price of the grain dramatically for farmers, but many farmers are unaware of this possibility and don't do that additional value added. Contractual farming is an important part of the system, and if it were used more broadly, it would allow for the uniformity of quality and the uniformity of grain that is needed by the processors. But once again, the processors are not communicating well with the production systems, and the result is that the grain that is produced by farmers often is not uniform and is not really usable by the processors without some additional investments in labor in order to do the grading, the cleaning, and prepare the grain for processing. Other crops have good aggregation systems, but beans do not. Beans continue to be very much a subsistence system throughout the region, but one of the mindsets that has to be changed is that beans have to be viewed as a potential commercial crop. Farmers, seed producers, and processors need to be talking to each other. They're not currently talking to each other. They talk in silos. There are farmer associations, there are seed associations, there are processor associations, but they talk to themselves. They don't talk to each other. And the result is that they're not aligning their interests, they're not aligning their activities, and there's great inefficiencies in the system as a result. Multi-stakeholder platforms are in a good position to remedy many of these issues. So there has to be a greater focus on pulling together all of the actors across the value chain into multi-stakeholder platforms so that these discussions can take place. The biggest off-takers are often government. There's the school feeding programs, there's the prison feeding programs. There is a demand out there. However, that demand is not very discriminating currently, and it's not the same demand that the processors would have. There are other large groups that could serve as multi-stakeholder platforms. There was a mention of the East African Grain Council. There's also Spice World, which is a huge processing entity that could serve as a host for a multi-stakeholder platform because they have a huge vested interest in the production of legumes. There's an East African Farmer Federation that could be used as a platform. So there are lots of groups out there who could potentially serve as the base for the platform, but they are not currently functioning as multi-stakeholder platforms. There needs to be more research on the nutritional property of land races. Some of the traditional crops have great potential. However, their nutritional properties are often unknown. And so in order for them to be able to receive the kind of attention and get the commercial outlet that would be needed in order to turn them into profitable production systems, there has to be more research done on the nutritional properties of those traditional crops. And farmer organizations need to be strengthened in order to achieve efficiencies. They don't work together, they often work independently. This drives down the price of grain, especially at harvest time. And so farmers find it difficult to profit from their legume production. And that's a brief summary of our group's discussion. Thank you, Simon.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Very interesting and insightful feedback there from Group 2. Well, we now move to Group 3. Rapporteur for Group 3.
Yeah, thank you so much, Simon. I'm going to present the findings for Room 3, and we mainly worked on value chain, system integration, and multi-stakeholder platforms. So for value chain and system integration, we discussed about the weak linkages in the legume value chains, and we came up with a conclusion that there is a weak link in production. The volume produced per acre is still low, leading to a lot of import from the neighboring countries. There's also a disconnect or a weak link in market and market linkages. Also in value addition, innovation is still a problem, and also a lack of communication between the value chain actors is still our weakest linkages in legume value chains. We also discussed about focus on increasing consumption, production, increasing access to market, and the team members suggested that increasing production is still focus on the increasing consumption, that is increasing production. There's a lot of input in the legume value chain, also increasing consumption and leakage market in the countries like Uganda and also the East African communities. what are some of the research that could help us answer some specific question in legume value chain? We talked of assessing value chain performance at various nodes of legume and value chains. For the stakeholder platform, we discussed whether there's entities or organization in the East African communities that, is there a single entity or more than one entity in East Africa that currently bring together all the actors in the value chain for discussion, coordination, support, and joint action? The members suggested that yes, there are different organizations which are working on legume, for example, SIAT, which is mostly working on common bean. There is the Kilimo Trust, which is mostly working also on legume and rice. We also discussed about the biggest buyers of legume in East Africa, and members suggested that there are different buyers, for example, the institutions, learning institution, and also the export trade groups. For the coordination, we came up with a conclusion that the coordination is done mostly between the main buyers and the financiers. That is for the farmers who are in a contract, and also for producers. For the producer buyer equation, we suggested that the farmers cooperatives and leaders are mostly leading in the producer buyer equations. We also discussed about the research which can be done around this area, and the members suggested that assessment of legume value chain players' performance can be done around this area, and also assess the effect of value chain organization on profitability of legume enterprises. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for that comprehensive feedback from room 3. And now we move on to the room 4.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Yeah. So Miriam had led a very interesting discussion between us, touching on resilience and climate change, pertaining to the main threats to sustainability. It was first noted that the farmer segment that's linked to, market and environmental vulnerability. This is a key component that is a threat, particularly in Kenya. One of the biggest threats, though, however, is the information gap. That is how farmers receive information pertaining to the varieties, because there's a number of that come their way, because this affects adoption rates. If you find, for instance, a Kenyan farmer, he or she's not necessarily aware with the best varieties or even the existing varieties that are out there, so they're kind of bewildered about which one is appropriate for their given context. Another threat that was mentioned was just in general how drought, heat, and rainfall affect public-private sector partnerships. By that I mean is there's no policies in place for these public-private sectors to coexist together, as opposed to compete and develop legumes that are resilient to drought, heat, and heavy rainfall. For instance, in Kenya, the government's involved in procuring the seeds, but practically speaking, the government needs to support more of a fair platform, given that the private sector needs to thrive a little bit. But what typically happens is that they have a platform, and the one large scale producer multiplier outcompetes all small scale. So there's a lot of crowding out that occurs, and there's no proper policies in place for that fair platform or fair competition to exist. Moving on to what implications this would have or how it creates bottlenecks. Well, clearly, if there's one multiplier or just several within a country, that leaves the country vulnerable to, for instance, if one fails or if there's too high of a price for the government that they cannot afford. And then another thing that exists, of course, is the lack of adoption, this bottleneck that exists between the breeder and the farmer. So in looking at research to address these bottlenecks, of course, the first one is figuring out what type of packaging, by that information packaging, would need to take place to make or to allow farmers to make more informed decisions. So there need to be a study of why farmers, stop, adopt, pick up, as opposed to just looking at adoption as an initial, or rather just a single instance, looking at it as a continuous decision, or at least looking at the expansion of it. So looking at how varieties are using, DNA markers to look at how seeds are used across particular communities. Another thing to look at is just developing climate smart strategies, conducting more specific research for breeders in countries where there's less varieties that are available. As we saw in the previous presentation, the one regarding climate is that there's only a few countries that perhaps develop climate smart varieties, whereas others develop a lot more. So that needs to be looked into. And then finally, looking at decision-making processes, those can be studied as well. So extension institutions can better package the seed material to make more informed decisions for farmers, and doing in-depth interviews and mapping, again, the adoption process. Looking at the value chain, the connection between the inputs, so that is the seed producers, and the outputs, the farmers, there's a broken link there in adoption, and that affects the entire sector, particularly in Eastern Africa. So there needs to be more study on the preference for traits among farmers. Sometimes discrete choice experiments are used to do that, but there's other methods as well. Farmers, it was also known that sometimes farmers are, rational in the fact that they don't necessarily buy certified seed every season. They'll use a second generation of seed, given that, in one season there might be much more preferable rainfall, or less heat, and the seed is still yielding well. So those need to be taken into consideration among the value chain, not necessarily just because farmers aren't purchasing certified seed annually. There's also mentioned that there's a weak link between small-scale farmers and lucrative markets, particularly at the international level. So do justice to conduct further research on post-harvest losses, but more so what techniques or what practices are being used, and what is the quality of the seed after these techniques or technologies are used. What research would help answer these questions? It would be assessing seed quality at harvest time for the seed after several weeks. And then also looking at studying farmers' willingness to join cooperatives so they can negotiate better prices and enhance entry into larger markets. And then finally, as a closing remark, which I can appreciate as a systems modeler, one individual in the group mentioned that these factors all need to be assessed together to evaluate specific scenarios. So each stakeholder isn't necessarily affected, in the same way, but they're all affected differently in the issues that I just mentioned. So we need to look at the linkages and develop an entire strategy of the entire legume seed system in a more holistic manner. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Timmy, for that thorough and in-depth summary from Group 4. That brings us to the end of the reporting back to the plenary. We thank you all once again for your active participation, insights, reflections, and comments. It has been very inspiring to see such a diverse group come together, share perspectives, and collaborate on this important topic. The lab will find a way of collating all these views to reflect what the stakeholders from the Eastern African region has been able to bring together in this convening. So that's all from my side. I will now request the Legume Systems Innovation Lab Program Manager, David Dion, to provide the details of the way forward and opportunities to continue adding your ideas. David, the floor is yours, and from my side, goodbye.
Thank you, Simon, and thank you to all the participants for spending the time to actively participate in today's regional stakeholder convening. I request you continue to actively participate. Let's continue the discussion through a questionnaire that we will send to each one of you. We will be sharing the recordings of the presentations and a link to a questionnaire form later this week to allow further feedback on the gaps in the legume systems and research priorities for East Africa. We ask that you complete the questionnaire. After we receive your input from today and your responses to that questionnaire, we anticipate releasing the call for proposals in May. You may have questions about the call for proposals, and we saw some of those questions in the chat or the Q&A. Please note that we will be hosting an informative webinar scheduled after the release of the request for proposals. So you will have time to review the details, such as the requirements that are in the call for proposals before the informative webinar. Given the process is competitive, the management entity does not reply individually to questions. Instead, a public document called the Frequently Asked Questions document will be posted on our website. It will list the questions that we have received and provide answers, if an answer is possible, so that all applicants have the same information. Therefore, please consult the Call for Proposals document once it is released, the Frequently Asked Questions document once it is on the website, and the responses given during the public question and answer or informative webinar as the answers to the requirements to apply. You can expect the process to be a two-round competitive process. First, applicants will reply to the request for proposals with a concept note proposal. A subset of those concept notes will then move on to a second round and submit a full proposal. Again, the specific requirements for submitting a concept note proposal, the types of research partners to include in research proposals, and other details will be released by May. I'd like to thank you for attending today's regional stakeholder convening. I'd like to thank Simon for his great job facilitating, and also to the breakout room facilitators and secretaries and reporters, and also to the TLT members for presenting. We look forward to your feedback in the questionnaire that will be sent to capture any comments you were unable to share today on the gaps in the legume systems and the research priorities to address those gaps. Now I'd like to request Legume Systems Innovation Lab Director Barry Pittendry to provide closing remarks and to close our meeting. Barry, over to you.
Great. Thank you, David. Much appreciated. So before I begin with the closing reflections, I'd just like to begin with a thanks. I'd like to thank Simon for all his efforts today with hosting this meeting. It's highly appreciated. Of course, we couldn't do all of this without USAID Washington support, as well as the support of the missions. So I'd like to thank USAID Washington, as well as the USAID missions, for their ongoing support. Most notably, I'd like to point out Daniel Bailey as our AOR, and thank him for his ongoing support and collaboration in this program. His support is critical to our ongoing operations. So again, thank you, Daniel, for all your efforts. I'd like to thank the presenters and participants and stakeholders today for your time and effort and involvement with this process. Your time and effort have been critical for helping us move collectively as a community moving forward. I'd like to thank the management entity for all your efforts today as well. So just in terms of reflections, I'd like to just sort of step back and go over some of the highlights that were mentioned today. Communication has been mentioned throughout our conversations today. We need to identify better ways to communicate across the legume system to reach all actors of the value chains and to educate each other on the roles that each other group in the community plays. This is really a two-way communication process that ultimately, if we can strengthen this, will provide for a better overall systems approach to strengthening legume systems. Hand in hand with communication, there's a need to collectively identify gaps and priorities. Our collaboration is key. The input and participation of everyone today and in the coming days is critical to the impact we can have on this system. Breeders need to understand the needs of smallholder farmers. Policy makers need to understand how subsidies and other inputs in the system can distort the market long-term. And processors need to understand what products consumers demand. Multi-stakeholder platforms can be a solution to bring the value chain together for mutual benefit and success. Utilizing the product lifecycle can ensure that we're developing products that fulfill systems gaps. Other themes from today focused on our need to recognize and leverage the diverse and specific needs and strengths of people. Opportunities exist for women and youth-led businesses. Youth are champions of information technology. It can drive communication efforts and extension and education platforms. As we all know, our climate is changing. We are seeing increased dry periods and more frequent and longer heat waves. We are experiencing decreases in rainfall in some areas and increased rainfalls in others. We're going to need to address climate resilient agriculture as we move forward. Of course, legumes will play a critical role in climate resilient agriculture. It may be different genotypes, different lines of particular crops that we are currently growing. It may involve a complete shift to new legume crops in regions where existing legume crops may have challenges. For example, shift of beans to cowpeas or vice versa. We're looking at other important legume crops that we maybe have not paid as much attention to in the past. Again, I will step back and say thank you for everyone and for your involvement today. This has been highly appreciated with your time and effort and your inputs. So many thanks for sharing your time and your expertise with us. We look forward to continuing this conversation with you as we move forward in this program. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.